Welcome back, brother Sam Lore. Tonight we're diving into the lore of the Octarius War. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Before I get to the madness, be sure to like and comment in the videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor. And I thank you guys for the support. Y'all been killing it. Now, let's get into the video.
The last orc on Orok was still laughing when the rippers reached his eyes. He stood atop a hill that had not existed at sunrise. It was made from the dead, green bodies and violet-black carcasses mangled together beneath a rain of acidic blood. Gaunts lay heaped 10 deep around him, their hooked limbs locked in death spasms, their skulls split by shooter rounds or crushed flat beneath iron-shod boots. Orc boys were buried among them, hacked open, disemboweled, and gnawed down to the spine. The knob had lost his left arm somewhere below the elbow. He did not remember when. A Tyranid warrior had opened his belly with a bone sword, spilling ropes of glistening intestine over his belt. He had stuffed the loops back inside with his remaining hand and sealed the wound beneath a scavenged plate. His shooter clicked. He pulled the trigger again. Click. The weapon's barrels smoked beneath a crust of alien tissue. The last shell had removed the face of a Hormagaunt, climbing the corpse mound. Its headless body still scrabbled upward, talons punching through the dead to find purchase. Beyond it, the horizon moved. What he had believed to be dusk was the shadow of the swarm. Tyranids covered the plains from one edge of the world to the other, an advancing ocean of carapaces, claws, teeth, and weapon symbiotes. Winged organisms filled the sky. Burrowing monsters split the earth. Bio-titans strode among the lesser creatures, their vast silhouettes wreathed in spores and burning promethium. No orc guns answered them. No engines roared. No warboss bellowed fresh orders across the Vox. Orok was silent, except for the feeding. The knob threw his useless shooter into the swarm and drew his chopper. The blade was notched, bent and thick with matter from 100 kills. Rippers spilled over the corpse mound in a chittering tide. They fastened onto his boots, calves and thighs, sawing through hide and muscle with crescent teeth. One forced its head beneath the plate covering his belly and began eating what it found there. The knob laughed harder. "That all you got?" He stamped until the bones in his foot shattered. Rippers burst beneath his heel, spraying pale organs and black ichor across the dead. More replaced them. They climbed his back. They chewed through his neck. One hooked its claws into his lower eyelid and dragged itself upward. The knob raised his chopper toward the moving horizon. "Come on, Den." The living darkness descended. 9 months earlier, an Imperial Inquisitor had decided that two monsters should destroy one another. The caverns of Carpathia had swallowed 23 Deathwatch Space Marines before Inquisitor Cryptman found the brood nest. The survivors descended through tunnels that sweated translucent resin. The substance stretched between the walls in glistening membranes and clung to their black plate in ropey strands. Lumen globes burned behind them, each caged light throwing long shadows over human skeletons cemented into the stone. Some had been stripped clean. Others retained yellowed skin stretched across their faces and ribs. Their jaws hung open. Resin filled their throats, eye sockets and shattered chests. Several had been arranged with their arms spread wide, crude mockeries of Imperial saints awaiting benediction. Watch Captain Acasta Vare raised one gauntlet. The kill team halted. Behind him, 5 warriors formed a defensive ring around the stasis reliquary. The machine floated upon a suspensor field, its iron housing covered in wax seals, prayer strips, and warning sigils. Cables ran from its containment core to the gravitic snares carried by brothers Malachi and Severin. Vare studied the tunnel through the targeter of his helm. Nothing moved. Nothing had moved for 6 minutes. That was why he knew they were being watched. "Range?" he asked. Brother Severin knelt beside a pulsing auspex. The Raven Guard's voice came through the Vox as a murmur of corrupted static. "Uncertain. The stone is saturated with biological residue. Movement returns at 9 meters, then 20, then behind us. Brother Hakon gave a low growl. The space wolf held his bolter angled toward the ceiling. Then the machine lies. The machine reports what it is permitted to detect, said Severin. A clicking sound traveled through the rock. It came from ahead, then behind, then from beneath their boots. The kill team's vox channels filled with whispering. The sounds almost resembled human voices, though no word remained whole long enough to understand. Ver heard his own name spoken in a dead man's voice. Malachi began reciting the litany of detestation beneath his breath. Cryptman walked within the formation, his carapace armor covered by a long coat of scorched leather. He possessed none of the transhuman mass of his escort. Even so, there was no haste in him, no fear. One gloved hand rested upon the grip of his needle pistol. "We are close," he said. Hakon glanced back. "Your certainty is touching, Inquisitor." "My certainty has buried worlds, Space Wolf. It will survive your contempt." Ver silenced them with a closed fist. No plasma, no melter, no fragmentation munitions. The dominant brood specimens are to be taken intact. Malachi turned his skull-faced helm toward Cryptman. "You forbid us the weapons of execution while sending us into their den? I forbid you from destroying the reason you are here. We have lost 23 brothers, and therefore you understand the cost of failure." The Black Templar's grip tightened around his shock maul. Blue current crawled across its head. Ver moved first. "Advance." The Death Watch entered the brood nest. The tunnel widened into a vault shaped by claws rather than tools. Resinous pillars rose from the floor and met above them in a web of hardened mucus. Human remains filled alcoves along the walls. Workers, soldiers, priests and children had been broken down and sorted into piles. Skulls lay together. Rib cages had been threaded onto organic cords. Hundreds of severed hands had been pressed into the resin, their fingers protruding like pale roots. The smell penetrated even the filters of Ver's helm. Old blood, human waste, mold, alien pheromones. He saw the first Genestealer reflected in Malachi's pauldron. "Contact!" It dropped without sound. Severin turned too slowly. 4 arms struck his breastplate and shoulders, talons shrieking across ceramite. The Raven Guard fired his bolter into the ceiling as the creature bore him down. Ver drove his combat blade beneath its jaw and punched upward. The point emerged through the top of its skull. More came from the walls. Sections of resin ruptured. Genestealers unfolded from hollows, scarcely larger than their torsos, their bodies pale from years without light. Their eyes gleamed like wet gemstones. Their inner jaws snapped as they attacked. The Death Watch did not shout. They reacted. Bolters fired single shots into limbs rather than torsos. Shock mauls broke joints. Gravitic snares discharged cones of shimmering force that dragged creatures from walls and pinned them against the ground. Every warrior understood the mission. Every warrior hated it. Hakon caught a Genestealer by the throat as it lunged. Its upper claws tore grooves through his breastplate. Its lower arms closed around his waist, talons seeking the softer armor seals. He headbutted it once, shattering its facial plate, then hurled it into the range of Malachi's restraint field. "Target bound," Malachi reported. "Mark it," Ver ordered. The stasis reliquary opened. Mechanical arms unfolded from its interior. They seized the spasming creature, pulled it inside and locked around its limbs. Frost spread over its carapace as the field engaged. One specimen. Cryptman required a brood. The lumen globes died, not one after another, all at once. Darkness filled the nest. The Death Watch helms shifted to thermal sight. The display turned the cavern into layers of cold stone, hot armor, and rapidly moving shapes. There were too many. Several remained motionless against the walls, hiding their body heat among the organic resin. "Rear contact," Severin warned. Something struck Brother Tiber. His locator rune shot backward through the darkness. Stone cracked. The rune vanished into a side passage that had not appeared on the auspex. "Tiber," Ver voxed. No answer. The whispering grew louder. Tiber's bolter fired twice in the distance. A Genestealer screamed. Metal tore. The bolter fired again, then became silent. Ver started toward the passage. 3 creatures dropped between him and the opening. Malachi met the first with his maul. The charged head collapsed its thorax, spraying cooked organs through the cracks in its carapace. Hakon shot the second through both knees and seized it before it could fall. The third struck Ver with enough force to throw him against a resin pillar. Its talons came down. Ver crossed his forearms and caught the blow on his vambraces. The claws pierced the ceramite's outer layers. Warning runes ignited across his vision. He drove one boot into the creature's abdomen, pushed it back, and fired a restraint bolt into its chest. The specialized round did not explode. It opened. Monofilament wires whipped around the Genestealer's limbs and contracted. The creature crashed onto its side, shrieking as the fibers cut through its outer armor. "Second specimen," Ver said. The reliquary dragged it inside. A shape staggered from the side tunnel. Brother Tiber returned. His helmet was gone. So was the front of his armor. The Genestealers had peeled his breastplate outward from the collar, opening the ceramite like the petals of an iron flower. One of his hearts hung outside his chest, still twitching inside a torn pericardial sac. His left lung had collapsed. Blood ran from his mouth in sheets. He took 3 steps into the nest. A Genestealer unfolded from behind him and pulled. Tiber came apart at the waist. His upper body struck the ground before Ver. His remaining hand closed around the watch captain's boot. "Complete," Tiber rasped. Ver looked down. A gravitic snare was locked around the creature behind him. Even while being butchered, Tiber had completed the capture. Ver triggered the device. The snare crushed the Genestealer against the tunnel floor. Hakon and Malachi dragged it toward the reliquary, while Tiber's fingers went slack. The stasis field closed over the brood. The temperature inside the vault plunged. Frost sealed the creatures beneath layers of opaque crystal. Their shrieks ceased. Their claws became motionless a finger's breadth from the containment glass. The remaining Genestealers withdrew. They did not flee in panic. They vanished in coordinated silence, abandoning the captured brood rather than spending more bodies in a failed recovery. Ver stared into the darkness after them. "They understand," he said. Kryptman approached the reliquary. "Of course they understand. You knew they would sacrifice the brood." "I suspected it." Ver looked at Tiber's divided corpse. "And us?" Kryptman did not follow his gaze. "You were not sacrificed. You succeeded." The Death Watch were veteran hunters, gathered from the Adeptus Astartes and committed to the Ordo Xenos' wars, trained to employ specialized weapons and unorthodox methods against alien threats. Yet no training made obedience clean. They burned the nest behind them. The bodies of the dead remained below. Kryptman revealed the purpose of their deaths aboard the strike cruiser Ultima Ratio, while Carpathia diminished behind armored viewports. A hololithic map of the southern galactic plane burned above the strategium table. Hive Fleet Leviathan appeared as branching crimson tendrils penetrating Imperial space. Each tendril divided into hundreds of lesser paths. Worlds flashed and disappeared beneath them. Ver stood opposite the Inquisitor, his damaged armor still wet with alien blood. "You cannot destroy it," Kryptman said. "Not with the forces available to us. Not before it reaches another 100 worlds. Then summon greater forces. From where? Cadia? Armageddon? Terra? Name the undefended frontier you would create." The hololith shifted. A region of orc-held space glowed green. "The Octarius Empire," Ver said. "One of the largest concentrations of greenskin strength within this region. Aggressive, prolific, self-sustaining. You intend to feed Leviathan to them. I intend to divert it. You speak as though the distinction absolves you. Absolution is for priests and dying men." Kryptman expanded the projection. At its center drifted a space hulk, designated Perdition's Flame. The Genestealers will provide the beacon. The Hulk will provide the vessel. Geist will provide the necessary alteration in trajectory. And the Orks? They will do what they have always done. They will fight. Vare studied the branching red tendrils and the green empire waiting ahead. Prolonged war strengthens greenskins. It also kills them. And every corpse will feed the hive fleet. Yes. The admission came without hesitation. You may be creating the victor of this war rather than preventing one. Cryptman dismissed the hololith. I am creating time. Perdition's flame emerged from the warp 3 weeks later. It resembled a continent torn from some damned world and cast into the stars. Hundreds of vessels had fused into its mass. Imperial cruisers, pilgrim transports, refinery hulks, alien craft and warships whose makers had been extinct before mankind reached the void. Cathedral spires protruded from slabs of armor. Engines large enough to propel cities burned beside ruptured launch bays and forests of broken antennae. The Death Watch planted the stasis reliquary inside an ancient cargo vault. When the field disengaged, the Genestealers awoke together. Their eyes opened. Their claws touched the deck. Deep within the hulk, other eyes opened in answer. Cryptman's fleet withdrew. Cyclonic charges struck Geist. The moon fractured beneath a bloom of white fire, and the violence of its destruction altered the space hulk's course toward Octarius. Weeks later, Gorzad Ironjaw stood inside an Ork boarding craft and killed a grot for touching his chopper. The grot had only been cleaning it. That did not matter. Gorzad kicked the body beneath a bench while the Lutars laughed. He was smaller than most of them, younger and equipped with armor assembled from plates no other Ork had wanted. His lower jaw had been broken in 3 places and had healed crooked, forcing one tusk through the flesh of his cheek. Nob Grimsnick leaned over him. What if there ain't nothing worth nicking? Gorzad looked up at the larger Ork. Then I'll nick your gun. The laughter stopped. Grimsnick bared his fangs. Gorzad did the same. Neither attacked. Not yet. The boarding craft struck Perdition's flame hard enough to throw half the mob from its feet. Magnetic clamps engaged. Cutting torches opened the hull, spilling the Lutars into a cavernous engine deck. Machinery filled the chamber. Generators, weapon housings, ammunition crates, coils of copper thicker than Orks. An engine assembly large enough to power a cruiser stood beneath the rusting ribs of an imperial shrine. The war boss roared with delight. Take everything! The Lutars scattered. Gorzad found the first smear of blood behind a stack of munition boxes. It ended beneath the wall. There was no corpse, no drag trail. 3 boys had disappeared. Boss, he called. The war boss was supervising the removal of a generator by hitting everyone involved. What? Something's eaten the lads. Tell it they're mine. The Genestealers attacked. They came from above, below, and inside the machinery. One landed among the Lutars and opened 4 Orks before its feet touched the deck. Talons sheared arms from shoulders and split torsos from groin to throat. Another tore Grimsnick's head free, with part of his spine attached. The Lutars fired in every direction. Gorzad fired through them. His shooter rounds punched through 2 boys and struck the Genestealer behind them. The creature staggered, half its skull torn away. Gorzad charged before it recovered, seized a broken engine coupling in both hands, and beat it down. He struck until the coupling bent. He struck until its carapace collapsed. He struck until the floor became slick with pulp, and the thing stopped resembling an enemy. Gotcha, he panted. The survivors fled with an engine, a crate of guns and armfuls of teeth torn from the dead. One carried a leathery egg sac beneath his armor. Another pressed a hand against 4 shallow punctures in his chest and told no one what had happened. Their shuttle tore free as Genestealers flooded the engine deck behind them. Gorzad looked at the stolen machinery and counted the teeth in his fist. They had escaped. They had loot. They had won. Across the Octarius sector, the infection traveled with them. Boss Zagstruck and his vulture squad would descend upon the visible infestations with rocket packs, screaming and choppers raised, but the beacon had already called into the dark. Far beyond the Empire, Hive Fleet Leviathan heard. The Hive mind did not speak. It did not hate. It did not know mercy, impatience, or triumph. Its awareness passed through organisms larger than cities and creatures smaller than cells, an intelligence distributed across an interstellar ecosystem built to fight, die, and consume. Living ships contracted around their internal suns. Feeder tendrils withdrew. Vast bodies rolled through the void, turning toward the Genestealer's call. One star disappeared, then another. Then 1,000 more vanished behind a wall of chitin, tendrils, and hunger. The argument began over a crate of shooter rounds and ended when war boss Ragruk Splithelm crushed an Ork's skull against it. The boy's name had been Ugskar. He had claimed the ammunition belonged to his mob because his mob had found it beneath the wreckage of a fuel wagon. Krasnik Bonichewa claimed the shells were his because he had shot the boy who had first discovered the wagon. Both explanations possessed merit by Ork standards. Ragruk listened to them for several moments, grew bored, seized Ugskar by the neck, and hammered his face into the ammunition crate. The first impact broke both tusks. The second flattened his nose. By the fifth, the front of his skull had collapsed into the metal lid, and blood was leaking between the planks. Ragruk released him. Ugskar slid to the ground, twitching. "Half the shells go to Krasnik," the war boss declared. "Other half go to me." Krasnik stared at the dead boy. "What about Ugskar's mob?" "They can have his teeth." That settled the matter. Orok's eastern fortress sprawled around them, a brutal mass of scrap towers, gun trenches, armor plates, and stone ramparts driven into the ochre plain. Smoke climbed from hundreds of chimneys. Grots hurried between the batteries carrying shells larger than their bodies. Mechs hammered at weapon housings, arguing over which exposed cables were supposed to be burning. Above them, the sky changed color. Ragruk looked up. At first, he mistook the shadows for storm clouds. Orok's atmosphere often boiled with ash from the forge pits and black fumes from the promethium wells. Then the first cloud altered course against the wind. The second divided. The third opened like a wound. Millions of objects descended through the upper atmosphere, their surfaces glowing red from entry. Some were scarcely larger than battle wagons. Others possessed the mass of fortresses. They fell in dense, curving streams, trailing vapor, blood, and sheets of burning tissue. A grot dropped the shell it was carrying. "Boss," it whispered. Ragruk's broken face split into a grin. "Get the guns ready." The alarm spread through the fortress as a series of explosions. Sirens wailed. Bells clanged. Nobs fired their weapons into the air to summon their mobs, killing several boys who had climbed onto the walls for a better view. Engines coughed awake. Gun crews turned weapons toward the heavens, while mechs kicked control panels and threatened the machinery with dismantlement. The first mycetic spore struck the plain beyond the fortress. It did not explode. It burst. A membrane thicker than tank armor tore open, releasing pressurized fluid and dozens of pale organisms. Hormagaunts landed in the mud on scything limbs, shook themselves free of embryonic slime, and sprinted toward the walls before the pod had stopped convulsing. Then the rest began to fall. "Daka!" Ragruk roared. Orok answered. Quad guns opened fire from the towers, their barrels spinning into blurs. Streams of shells climbed through the smoke and struck descending spores, tearing them apart in incandescent blossoms. Rockets corkscrewed upward in erratic swarms, several crashing into Ork fortifications before reaching the sky. Looted macro cannons discharged with enough force to crack their own foundations. The heavens became a furnace. Mycetic spores ruptured overhead. Burning gaunts, severed limbs, and sacks of steaming organs rained onto the defenders. Acidic fluids splashed across armor and flesh, hissing as they ate into both. A headless creature landed among a mob of shooter boys, rose on broken legs, and killed 3 before a knob split it apart. Ragnarok stood upon the battlement and fired his twin-linked shooter into the descending swarm. "More!" he bellowed. "Send more, you skinny runts!" Something enormous passed over the fortress. Its shadow swallowed towers, gun pits, and thousands of orcs. Bioplasma fell from its abdomen in burning globules. One struck an artillery platform and transformed the gun crew into luminous silhouettes before their bodies collapsed into charred heaps. The defensive fire continued. The Orks had built the eastern fortress to resist rival greenskin tribes, imperial invasions, and the occasional attack by creatures migrating from the fungal swamps. Its ammunition stores were immense. They were not infinite. The first batteries ran dry while spores still covered the sky. Grots dragged open crates and found them empty. Mechs loaded incompatible shells into overheated weapons. One quad gun detonated when its crew forced a rocket warhead into the feed mechanism, scattering metal and orc body parts across the rampart. Ragnarok heard a new sound beneath the guns. Scratching. Thousands of claws struck stone, metal, and packed earth. The Hormagaunts reached the outer barricades. They came at a speed no orc had expected. Lean bodies vaulted coils of razor wire and scrap walls in single bounds. Their talons stabbed down into gun crews, opening throats and bellies. One cleared the fortress ditch, landed upon an orc's shoulders, and cut his head into 3 separate pieces before touching the ground. Termagants followed behind them. The weapon organisms fused to their forelimbs convulsed. Flesh borers spat from their living barrels in pulsing volleys. The beetle-like ammunition struck orcs and burrowed inward. One shooter boy looked down as something disappeared into his forearm. His skin bulged. The creature tunneled beneath the muscle, leaving a twisting ridge that raced toward his elbow. He bit at it, tore away a mouthful of his own flesh, and exposed the flesh borer chewing through the bone. He crushed it between his teeth. 3 more struck his chest. The boy continued firing until the organisms consumed the tendons controlling his right arm. When the limbs ceased responding, he gripped his shooter with the other hand and used it as a club. Across the trench line, orcs fought with similar indifference to injury. They stamped on rippers, strangled gaunts with their own intestines, and continued roaring after losing jaws, limbs, and slabs of muscle. The first trench was overrun. The second filled with bodies until the Tyranids crossed upon the dead. The third held. Ragnarok leapt down from the wall, landing hard enough to buckle the metal beneath his boots. His power claw snapped open and closed. The weapon's teeth were painted with dried blood from the morning's ammunition dispute. Krasnik Bonechua pointed toward the gun lines. "Boss, we can hold 'em here." Ragnarok turned slowly. "Hold?" "Yeah, let the guns do the work." Ragnarok struck him. The power claw closed around Krasnik's shoulder and removed his arm with part of his chest. The knob dropped, spraying blood over the warboss's boots. "Guns is for softening 'em up," Ragnarok said. "Choppers is for winning." He raised the claw. "Out of the trenches." The order traveled along the line. Tens of thousands of orcs abandoned the fortifications. They climbed from firing pits, poured through gates, and jumped from battlements. Boys trampled grots, wounded warriors and ammunition crews as they rushed toward the swarm. Knobs fired over their heads. Warbikers roared between the mobs, exhausts coughing black smoke and wheels crushing anyone too slow to move. "Wah!" The cry became physical. It rolled across the plain, rattling armor and stirring dust from the ground. Weird boys screamed as green energy crawled over their bodies. Engines surged faster. Weapons fired though no finger touched their triggers. The orcs hit the Tyranid advance like an armored landslide. Choppers broke carapaces. Sluggers blew open thoraxes at point-blank range. Boys seized gaunts by their tails and used them as clubs. One knob lost both legs to a warrior's bonesword and continued fighting from the ground, biting through the creature's ankle while its blade opened his back. Ragnarok drove into the center. His claw closed around a Hormagaunt and burst it apart. He backhanded another hard enough to tear its head free. Flesh borers struck his armor, burrowing into leather, metal, and scar tissue. He ignored them. The battle spread beneath him. Rippers swarmed through the grass, stripping wounded orcs to bone. Squigs met them head-on, snapping Tyranid organisms in half and swallowing them alive. Several squigs ruptured as rippers chewed their way out through distended bellies. Above those smaller wars, Tyranid warriors strode through the mobs. Their weapons fired living projectiles, while their blades moved with predatory precision. Knobs gathered to meet them, roaring challenges the synapse creatures neither understood nor acknowledged. Warbikes crashed into broods. Battle wagons rolled over both armies. A Carnifex lowered its horned head and charged one of the vehicles. The collision tore the battle wagon from the ground. It turned over in the air, shedding boys, ammunition, and burning fuel, then landed upon another mob. The Carnifex emerged through the wreckage. Its armor was scorched. One eye hung destroyed. It continued forward. A Squiggoth met it. The beast's tusks punched through the Carnifex's thorax and lifted it from the ground. Tyranid claws opened the Squiggoth's face, tearing away flesh in steaming strips. The Squiggoth roared, shook its head, and hurled the Carnifex beneath its feet. Something larger struck the Squiggoth from the side. The Biotitan towered over the battlefield, its carapace rising above smoke and gunfire. Limbs like siege cranes stabbed into the orc beast. Bioplasma washed across the howdah strapped to its back. Gunners became burning shapes. Ammunition cooked off in a chain of detonations that opened the Squiggoth from spine to belly. It remained standing for several heartbeats. Then it collapsed. Its death crushed hundreds of gaunts, scores of orcs, and one badly positioned battle wagon. Rippers immediately swarmed across both giant corpses. Far above Orok, a reinforcement vessel thundered through the outer system. Gorzad Ironjaw crouched in its forward compartment, surrounded by Lutaz, Goths, and the stolen machinery taken from Perdition's flame. The vessel had been built from 3 different hulls and possessed engines that disagreed about which direction they should drive it. A mech struck the navigation console with a wrench. "Still too slow," Gorzad growled. "The engines is giving all they got." "Den threaten 'em." "I already did." "Threaten 'em better." The Vox crackled with Orok's transmissions. At first, the reports delighted him. "Eastern Wall's got more bugs than boys. Send rockets to Battery 3. Don't send 'em. Battery 3's mine now. Tell Ragnarok I killed one bigger than his battle wagon." Then the messages began contradicting one another. The Western Fortress announced that it had broken the Tyranid advance. Moments later, a different voice reported that the Western Fortress had been surrounded. The Northern gun line demanded ammunition, while claiming every enemy within sight was dead. One transmission repeated the same sentence until static consumed it. "Still winning, still winning, still winning, still..." Gorzad seized the Vox horn. "Orok, this is Gorzad Ironjaw. Save some for us." Only screaming answered. He released the horn. "Faster," he told the mech. Below, Ragnarok saw the Tyranid center. Warriors gathered beneath a forest of fleshy banner crests. Gaunts moved around them in perfect currents, turning together, advancing together, dying without hesitation. Ragnarok understood none of the synaptic architecture directing them. He understood that the largest one was probably in charge. "Dat one!" His knobs followed him through the swarm. The warriors fired. Living rounds burst boys from within. Bonezords cut knobs apart. Ragnarok lost half his bodyguard before reaching the leader. It towered over him, 6-limbed and crowned in hardened chitin. Its eyes did not hold rage. They did not hold fear. That insulted him. Ragnarok seized one sword arm in his claw and tore it free. The warrior drove another blade through his abdomen. He stepped closer, forcing the weapon deeper, and closed the power claw around its head. "Look scared." The claw contracted. The warrior's skull burst. A convulsion passed through the nearby swarm. Hormagaunts stumbled. Termagants fired into one another. Rippers scattered without direction. Several organisms stopped entirely, their limbs twitching as the controlling signal vanished. The orcs saw hesitation and recognized victory. "They're running!" The Wah surged forward. Ragnarok tore the warrior's headless body from the blade lodged inside him and raised his claw. Boys flooded around him, hacking down disordered gaunts. War bikes punched through the line. Battle wagons advanced over heaps of shattered carapace. For several glorious minutes, the Tyranid center collapsed. Then the hive mind reached through another synapse node. Control returned, not gradually, instantly. Every gaunt turned at once. The advance resumed. The ground behind the Orks erupted. Raveners burst from beneath the abandoned trenches, their bodies flinging soil, armor plates and gun crews into the air. Morlocks opened vast sinkholes beneath artillery batteries. Mycetic spores struck the undefended fortress interior, releasing fresh organisms among the ammunition stores. Ragnarok looked back. The fortifications he had abandoned were filled with Tyranids. He looked toward the flanks. More spores descended there, sealing the plain beneath walls of new life. The center had not been the heart of the swarm. It had been bait. Ragnarok did not understand the design, but he understood encirclement. He grinned. Good. The Tyranids came from every direction. By late afternoon, Orok had become a single battlefield. No front remained. No rear existed. Fortresses burned. Planes vanished beneath bodies. The atmosphere filled with spores, ash, and the vapor of boiling fluids. Every surviving Ork fought wherever he stood. And beneath them all, another war began. Orkoid spores drifted from dead greenskins. Invisible to the warriors dying above, they settled into mud, blood, and cracked earth, carrying within them the fungal promise of more Orks. Tyranid phage cells entered the same soil. They found the spores. They consumed them. Feeder organisms descended upon the battlefields. Rippers ate soft tissue. Larger beasts severed limbs and dragged carcasses toward digestion pools. Capillary roots pushed through the earth and pierced the dead, drinking liquefied flesh from Ork and Tyranid alike. Nothing was wasted. Not courage, not strength, not defeat. Ragnarok died before sunset. His claw was still opening and closing when the Rippers entered his mouth. Night covered Orok. Gorzad's vessel reached orbit beneath a silent sky. No challenge codes answered them. No Ork beacon called them toward a landing ground. No gun battery fired an insult across the void. Below, the world had changed. Capillary towers rose from the plains like veins pulled from the flesh of a god. Rivers of dark biomass flowed through the ruins toward digestion structures. Vast feeder beasts moved among the fortresses, dismantling the last corpse heaps. The mech beside Gorzad stared through the viewport. They ate everything. Gorzad pressed one hand against the glass. He did not understand fear, not yet, but he understood theft. The Tyranids had taken the world, the weapons, the dead, and every fight that might have come after. They had left him nothing to kill. The asteroids around Gorala were armed. Some carried engines buried beneath their stone, waiting to ignite and drive them into the path of an enemy vessel. Others had been hollowed out and packed with rocket warheads, Promethium tanks, stolen plasma coils, and enough unstable ammunition to turn mountains into expanding clouds of shrapnel. Gun platforms hid inside the largest rocks. Their barrels protruded through natural fissures, blackened muzzles disguised beneath dust and frozen debris. Attack craft waited in excavated caverns, with engines cold and pilots fighting among themselves in the dark. Crude mines drifted through the belt, their trigger mechanisms built from proximity sensors, tripwires, grots, and in several cases, nothing more sophisticated than Orks, watching through armored viewports with detonators in their hands. Pirate war boss Scarfang had transformed the entire asteroid field into a loaded shooter. The Tyranids entered it without slowing. Gorzad Ironjaw watched them approach from the launch deck of a kill cruiser named Dar Blunt Instrument. The vessel shuddered around him as its engines strained to hold position behind a split asteroid. Red lumen globes burned above ranks of boarding torpedoes. Boys crowded between the launch rails, pushing, snarling and comparing weapons, while mechs hammered loose armor plates back into place. The forward blast doors were closed, but the viewing screens showed the enemy. Bioships moved through the darkness like the corpses of abyssal predators. Some were broad and armored, their hides layered in chitinous ridges. Others were long, pale and serpentine, surrounded by clouds of lesser organisms. Tendrils flexed around them. Weapon symbiotes swelled within ribbed cavities. Great sacs of digestive fluid hung beneath their bodies, translucent enough to reveal half-grown creatures drifting inside. There were fewer of them than there had been over Orok. That made the Orks louder. "Look at that little lot," said Nob Grimsnick Crumpjaw. "They sent scraps." Gorzad glanced at him. Grimsnick was larger, older, and burdened beneath plates of yellow armor, looted from bad moons he claimed to have killed personally. A chain of Tyranid teeth hung from his neck, though Gorzad suspected most had been purchased. Gorzad had hated him since boarding the cruiser. Grimsnick was the knob above him. That alone was reason enough. The launch deck vox boomed with Scarfang's voice. "Listen up, you useless runts." The fighting stopped. Even the mechs lowered their tools. Scarfang's image appeared upon the main pict screen, distorted by static and smoke. The pirate warboss wore a coat stitched from hides and void suit material, with pistols hanging from every strap across his chest. One eye had been replaced by a red targeting lens. His iron gob was shaped into a perpetual grin. "First mob inside one of them big floaty bugs gets first pick of the loot." The deck erupted. Boys fired weapons into the ceiling. Grots screamed and ran. One rocket struck an overhead crane, showering the launch rails with sparks and burning metal. Scarfang continued speaking over the noise. "Bring me anything that looks like a gun. Bring me anything that looks like an engine. Bring me anything that screams when you poke it." Grimsnick slammed one fist into Gorzad's chest. "That loot's mine." Gorzad looked down at the fist. "Only if you get there first." "I'm the knob." "Then you better run faster." Grimsnick reached for his chopper. The minefield detonated. The asteroids around the Tyranid fleet became suns. Stone cracked apart. Concealed warheads ignited within hollowed rocks, blasting metallic fragments across the void. Mines hurled themselves into bioships and vanished inside blossoms of ruptured tissue. A serpentine vessel split through the middle, its internal organs spreading outward in a glistening fan before freezing. Gun batteries opened fire. Macro shells crossed the asteroid field in incandescent lines. Rockets spiraled through debris and struck living hulls. Torpedoes burrowed into chitin, detonating beneath armor layers and throwing chunks of flesh larger than gunships into space. The Tyranid formation began to close around itself. Scarfang had expected that. Asteroids behind the fleet ignited their buried engines. Mountains accelerated from the darkness. The first struck a bioship broadside on. Chitin fractured. The vessel folded around the impact before disappearing beneath a storm of orc fire. Another asteroid missed its intended target and destroyed an orc attack ship instead. The Scar fleet cheered both explosions. Kill cruisers emerged from hiding. Their engines blazed. Their prows were covered in spikes, ram plates, and crude paintings of snarling orc faces. They fired everything at once, broadsides lighting the belt with shell trails, energy blasts, and clouds of debris. Some closed to distances no Imperial captain would have accepted. That was where orcs preferred to fight. The blunt instrument accelerated. Gorzad felt the deck tilt beneath him. A mech pulled a lever. The launch rail beneath Gorzad's torpedo began to move. Grimsnick shoved his way into the boarding craft first. "Move, you runts! I'm killing the biggest one." Gorzad entered behind him with 12 boys. They packed themselves into restraint cages around the torpedo's central spine. There were no seats. There was no room to swing a weapon. The interior smelled of fuel, sweat, and old blood. The hatch slammed shut. A grot strapped to the guidance mechanism stared at them with enormous eyes. "Point us at the biggest one," Grimsnick told it. The grot looked toward the sighting screen.
Which biggest one? Grimsnick shot it. The torpedo launched unguided. Acceleration crushed Gorzad against the restraint bars. The boarding craft spun as it crossed the void, passing between burning wreckage and streams of Tyranid projectiles. Something struck the hull and tore away an armor plate. Air screamed through the breach until an Ork's body became lodged in it. Then the torpedo hit. The impact snapped restraint bars and broke bones. Gorzad's iron jaw struck the warrior in front of him and split the back of the boy's skull. The warhead at the torpedo's nose detonated inward, opening a tunnel through layers of chitin, muscle, and fibrous armor. The hatch
burst open. Heat and stench entered together. Gorzad climbed into a living ship. The passage beyond the torpedo wound contracted around them. The walls were red, ridged and slick with translucent slime. Veins pulsed beneath membranes. Clusters of sensory cilia withdrew from the light of the Orcs' weapons. Grimsnick fired his shooter down the corridor. The rounds punched into flesh. The entire passage convulsed. "Ha!" Grimsnick said. "It felt dat." The walls tightened. Muscle contracted around the boarding party, crushing Orcs against one another. Gorzad wedged his chopper into a fold and hacked. Black blood sprayed from the wound. The pressure eased. They forced themselves forward. The corridor opened into a chamber filled with embryonic organisms suspended inside sacks of yellow fluid. Gaunts curled within some of them, their limbs folded against their bodies. Larger shapes twitched in others. Thick cords joined every sack to a pulsing organ in the chamber's center. "Loot," said one boy. He stabbed an embryo through its membrane. The sack burst over him. The half-formed creature opened its eyes. Its claws tore through his throat before its feet touched the floor. The other sacks opened. Gorzad fired until his shooter's barrel glowed. Embryonic gaunts spilled across the chamber, malformed but murderous. Some crawled because their legs had not finished growing. Others dragged wet organs behind them as they attacked. The Orcs hacked through them. Grimsnick reached the central organ and buried his chopper inside it. The organ spasmed. The chamber floor opened. Digestive fluid surged upward. It reached the Orc's boots first, steaming around metal and leather. One boy slipped. The fluid swallowed him to the chest, dissolving his armor straps and turning the exposed flesh beneath into red slurry. Gorzad seized a hanging vein and pulled himself higher. Sphincter-like openings appeared in the walls. Lesser organisms poured through them. They were pale, many-legged things, with mouths built for cutting rather than feeding. They attacked joints, eyes, and weapon hands. One climbed Gorzad's back and drove hooked limbs beneath his shoulder plate. He caught it, crushed it against the wall, and bit through its head. "Back!" Grimsnick shouted. "Thought you wanted the biggest one." "I found it. It's the ship." Grimsnick pushed toward the torpedo. The passage behind them contracted shut. Gorzad hacked at the wall, but each cut closed beneath clots of thickening fluid. More organisms entered the chamber. The digestive acid rose above his knees. He looked toward the torpedo lodged in the outer hull. Its fuel reservoir remained intact. Gorzad grinned. "Opened a wall." A boy stared at him. "What?" Gorzad pointed his shooter at the fuel line. The boy understood too late. The explosion tore through the chamber. Fire followed the digestive passages in both directions. The central organ burst, showering the walls with burning tissue. Pressure split the outer hull around the boarding wound, opening the chamber to vacuum. Air, fluid, Orks, and Tyranid organisms were dragged toward the breach. Gorzad caught the torpedo frame with one hand. His shoulder nearly left its socket. Grimsnick clung to Gorzad's leg. The living ship screamed. The sound traveled through its flesh rather than through the void, a vibration of pain that shook Gorzad's bones. The ruptured wall peeled outward. The blunt instrument crossed the breach with its gun decks exposed. Gorzad released his grip. Vacuum hurled him and Grimsnick from the dying bioship. They struck the cruiser's outer plating hard enough to dent it. Magnetic claws extended from a retrieval crane and dragged them toward an open airlock. Behind them, the bioship folded around the explosion. Its weapon sacks ignited. The vessel burst from within. The Orks claimed victory before the wreckage stopped burning. Scarfang's ambush destroyed almost the entire Tyranid fleet. Bioships drifted in pieces among shattered asteroids. Ork gunships circled the remains, firing into anything that moved and fighting one another over salvage rights. Inside the blunt instrument, Grimsnik stood over a captured weapon symbiote and declared it his. Gorzad struck him from behind. The first blow drove the knob to one knee. The second broke the yellow plates across his spine. Grimsnik turned, roaring, but Gorzad jammed the broken barrel of his shooter beneath the knob's jaw and fired. Grimsnik's head came apart. Gorzad tore the chain of Tyranid teeth from the corpse and placed it around his own neck. The surrounding boys watched. "Any of you got a problem?" No one answered. Gorzad looked at the captured weapon. "That's mine now." It was his first command. It lasted less than an hour before the surviving bioship reached Gorala. The creature had hidden behind the corpses of its own fleet, using dead vessels and asteroid fragments to conceal its movement. Half its body had been burned away. One side trailed organs and frozen blood. Its remaining propulsion chambers contracted with desperate force. Every Ork gun in range fired upon it. The bioship continued. Mycetic spores detached from its belly. Thousands fell toward Gorala. The bioship struck the atmosphere behind them. It became a burning wound in the sky, shedding carapace and tissue across half a continent before crashing into the red mesas. Scarfang watched from his flagship. Then he laughed. Ground fight. His fleet descended. Every ship capable of landing joined him. Battle wagons were dropped from cargo holds before the transports touched the ground. Wartrucks raced down unfinished ramps. Boys jumped from gunships and fired at the spores while falling. Gorzad remained behind. The blunt instrument had lost 2 engines, most of its port armor, and the mechanism controlling its landing claws. Mechs crawled through the damaged compartments, shouting at one another and welding over holes that still opened directly into space. Gorzad paced the command deck. "Fix it." A mech emerged from beneath a console. "Can't land without day claws." "Use the guns." "What?" "Fire 'em when we get near the ground." The mech considered this. "That might work." The planetary vox filled the deck. At first, the Orks were laughing. "Bugs is hiding into rocks. Found a nest. Burned it. Scarfang says first mob to catch one gets double rations." The Tyranids refused open battle. They attacked patrols crossing isolated valleys. Gaunts emerged from caves, killed the rear vehicles, and vanished before larger mobs could turn. Lictors took sentries from fortified camps without triggering alarms. Raveners erupted beneath fuel stores, destroyed them, and withdrew into tunnels. The Orks responded by traveling in greater numbers. The swarm adapted. It began meeting them in the open. Hormagaunts rushed the lead vehicles. Warriors struck the flanks. Carnifexes appeared long enough to destroy transports and then withdrew beneath covering fire from venom cannons. The attacks lasted minutes, sometimes less. They always ended before the Orks could surround the enemy. Scarfang became furious. "They're running again," he roared across the vox. One knob answered, "We crumped 'em good. Den why ain't there no bodies?" By the 4th night, the boys noticed the missing dead. Battlefields abandoned after dusk were empty by morning. Ork corpses vanished. Tyranid carcasses vanished. Trenches remained filled with spent ammunition, broken weapons, teeth and dark stains, but no meat. Feeder organisms moved through the night. Rippers stripped bodies. Larger creatures dragged the remains into hidden digestion pools. Capillary growths pierced the pools and carried the liquefied biomass toward the crashed bioship. The Tyranids replaced what they lost. The Orks did not. Scarfang pursued the 5th retreat, then the 6th, then the 7th. By the 10th, every war boss on Gorala understood that the Tyranids would flee. None understood that this was precisely why they kept chasing. The Hormagaunts struck a convoy beneath the western mesas. They killed the drivers of 3 war trucks, overturned a battle wagon, and withdrew into a canyon. Scarfang led the pursuit personally. Engines roared between the cliffs. Battle wagons crushed fleeing gaunts. Warbikes surged ahead, their riders firing into the backs of the swarm. The canyon narrowed. Green vapor rolled from fissures in the rock. Venomthropes drifted above concealed pits, their tendrils opening as they released clouds of poison. The first war truck entered the fog and vanished. A moment later, it emerged sideways, driver dead, and struck the canyon wall. The vehicle behind it rammed the wreck. A third climbed over both, rolled and exploded. The fog thickened. Orks coughed, blood into their iron gobs. Drivers lost sight of the road. Engines collided. Ammunition detonated inside overturned transports. Scarfang climbed from his battle wagon. "Get out and fight!" No enemy answered. The lictors came when the boys separated. One orc disappeared from beside a burning vehicle. Another was pulled upward into the fog, leaving his boots behind. A third found his own severed arm lying in the road before something struck him from behind. Scarfang fired into the mist. "Come on, you sneaky runts!" A lictor appeared before him. Its camouflage faded from the colors of the canyon into black, wet chitin. Scarfang shot it through the chest. Two more attacked from the walls. One opened his back. Another tore away his pistol arm. The pirate warboss seized the creature by the throat and crushed it against the rock, but feeder tendrils wrapped around his remaining leg. He fell. The fog filled with movement. Claws entered him from every direction. Scarfang continued roaring until a lictor removed his lower jaw. He tried to bite it without one. The swarm pinned him against the canyon floor, split his torso, and tore the pirate warboss apart, while his surviving boys died blindly around him. Gorzad heard the final transmission from orbit. There was no speech, only gunfire, metal impacts, and something wet moving across the Vox pickup. The mechs restored the blunt instrument's engines before dawn. They attempted to descend. Every known landing zone transmitted hostile signals. Orc tribes fought one another over Scarfang's title, each claiming the dead warboss's fleet. Ground batteries fired upon Gorzad because his ship might support a rival. Tyranid spores covered the valleys between the surviving camps. Gorzad ordered the vessel upward. 5 other ships followed. The rest remained, either trapped, destroyed, or unwilling to abandon the struggle for command. From the upper atmosphere, Gorzad watched fires spread across Gorala. The Tyranids had arrived with one broken ship and a fraction of the planet's defenders. They had not needed more. They had required only time, corpses and enemies willing to chase them. Gorzad touched the chain of stolen teeth around his neck. On Orok, the swarm had won by becoming the horizon. On Gorala, it had won by disappearing. The hunger had learned. Gargates announced itself with artillery. The first shell crossed the bow of the blunt instrument, while Gorzad's vessel was still descending through the upper atmosphere. It passed close enough to make the patched hull ring like a struck bell, then detonated behind them in a cloud of flame and metal fragments. A second shell came from below. It missed by less. Gorzad leaned over the command deck's forward rail and bellowed at the Vox grot. "Tell 'em we're Orks!" The grot clutched the speaking horn in both hands. "I did, boss." "Tell 'em louder." The grot repeated the identification code. Static answered. Somewhere beneath the clouds, an orc laughed through a damaged Vox channel. A third shell struck one of the ships following them. The smaller vessel broke through the middle. Its engines continued burning as the two halves fell separately toward the mountains. Gorzad watched it die. They heard us. The blunt instrument descended beneath the cloud layer. Octarius filled the world. Mountain ranges stretched from horizon to horizon, but no slope remained untouched. Scrap cities had been hammered into the stone. Chimneys taller than hive spires poured black smoke into a sky already bruised by industry. Gun towers rose from cliffs. Armor plates covered valleys. Rail lines crawled with ammunition wagons, slave trains and artillery engines hauled by tracked machines that looked as though they had been assembled during an earthquake. At the center stood Gargates. The capital of the Overfiend was not a city in any civilized sense. It was a continent of iron violence. Towers leaned against one another, connected by chains, bridges and weapon platforms. Factories vomited sparks into the daylight. Fungus breweries bubbled inside open vats. Fighting pits were dug beside slave pens, so the grots and captives could watch what awaited them. Every visible surface carried guns. Some pointed outward, many pointed inward. The blunt instrument struck the landing ground hard enough to tear away its remaining claws. Gorzad was already moving before the engines stopped. He kicked open the boarding hatch and stepped into heat, noise, and the stink of 1,000,000 orcs. No one welcomed him. A mob of Goths stood around the landing pit, black armor painted with crude white checks. Their nob wore iron plates across his chest and a horned helmet taken from something that had once been human. He watched Gorzad descend. "Who are you?" "Gorzad Ironjaw. Never heard of you." "That's 'cause you've been standing here doing nothing." The surrounding Goths laughed. The nob did not. He stepped close enough that his shadow covered Gorzad. "This is my landing ground." Gorzad looked past him at the arriving ships, the burning wreckage and the ammunition crews dragging cargo away. "Looks like a hole." The nob's hand closed around his chopper. Gorzad shot him in the stomach. The weapon clicked empty after one round. The shell tore through the nob's gut plate and burst inside him, but it did not kill him. He staggered, looked down at the smoking hole and roared. Gorzad threw the useless shooter aside and charged. They collided before the Goths. The nob was larger. His first blow split the armor across Gorzad's shoulder and drove him to one knee. Gorzad answered by burying his teeth in the nob's forearm. Green blood flooded his mouth. The nob hammered his fist into Gorzad's skull. Gorzad held on. Bone cracked beneath his bite. When the nob pulled away, Gorzad took a strip of flesh with him. He spat it into the dust, seized the larger orc's belt, and drove his forehead into the wound in the nob's stomach. The nob folded. Gorzad found the broken edge of the gut plate and tore upward. Metal peeled away. Flesh followed. The nob's abdomen opened from groin to sternum, spilling steaming organs over Gorzad's arms. He thrust both hands inside, found the spine behind the pulsing mass, and pulled until something broke. The nob collapsed. Gorzad stood over him, dripping blood. "Now it's my landing ground." The Goths looked at one another. Then they cheered. Recognition spread through violence. Before sunset, Gorzad had acquired the dead nob's armor, his boys, and 3 crates of ammunition that had technically belonged to someone else. He also acquired a mech. Big Mech Scabgob Voltkrumper lived beneath a gun tower that fired every time its loading mechanism jammed. The workshop had no door. It had once possessed one, but Scabgob had removed it because boys kept knocking before entering. The interior was crowded with weapon parts, engine blocks, severed cables, Tyranid carapaces and grots chained to workbenches. Scabgob examined Gorzad's ruined shooter. "This is rubbish. It killed a nob. Then he was rubbish too." The big mech was broad even for an orc, his spine bent beneath an array of tools, wires and mechanical arms. One eye was natural. The other was a cluster of lenses that clicked between colors as he inspected the weapon. Gorzad placed the dead nob's teeth on the workbench. "Make it louder." Scabgob swept the teeth into a box without counting them. He stripped the shooter to its frame, discarded most of the original pieces, and replaced them with components taken from 3 other guns. He added a second barrel, a drum magazine, a crude recoil brace, and a pressure chamber whose purpose he refused to explain. When he finished, the weapon was twice its former weight. Gorzad lifted it. "Will it work?" "Probably." "Will it explode?" "Definitely." Gorzad grinned. "Good." Doc Riptooth repaired his jaw in a chamber behind the fungus brewery. The pain boy tied Gorzad to a steel table with chains taken from a slave pen. He did not use anesthetic. Orcs rarely required it, and Riptooth considered pain an important part of diagnosis. He cut away the damaged flesh from Gorzad's cheek with a serrated blade, exposing bone and teeth. The jaw had healed incorrectly in several places. Riptooth broke it again with a hammer. Gorzad snapped one of the chains. "Hold still," said the doc. "I'm trying to make it worse." He fitted iron plates along the lower jaw and riveted them through the bone. Each strike of the pneumatic driver sent white fire through Gorzad's skull. Blood ran down his throat. He swallowed it. Riptooth admired the result. "That'll stop your face falling off." "Will it bite?" "Try it." Gorzad turned his head and bit through, the chain still holding his right arm. Riptooth nodded. "Good jaw." Someone laughed from the doorway. The weird boy was thin by Orc standards, though still large enough to tear a man apart. Copper rods had been driven through the skin of his skull. Chains ran from an iron collar around his neck to 3 minder grots standing behind him. Green light leaked from the corners of his eyes. Zaplug Headbanger stared at Gorzad. "What?" Zaplug's nostrils flared. "You smell of the dark." Gorzad tested the metal plates with his tongue. "Everything smells dark in here." "Not this dark." The weird boy leaned closer. The minder grots pulled on his chains but achieved nothing. "Something looked at you," Zaplug whispered. "Something with no face. Something that's got too many mouths." Gorzad laughed. "Then it can come get bitten." Zaplug did not laugh with him. "It already tasted your thoughts." The gathering began before the next dawn. Orcs came to Gargates from every direction. Goth columns marched beneath black banners, their boots shaking the roads. Bad Moons arrived in armor plated with gold, accompanied by ammunition wagons and grots carrying boxes of teeth. Evil Sons raced through the camps on bikes and buggies, killing anyone too slow to move. Death Skulls stole weapons from parked vehicles and painted them blue before the owners returned. Snakebites brought herds of squigs and squiggoths through the valleys. Blood Axes arrived in formations copied badly from Imperial armies, wearing camouflage that matched none of the surrounding terrain. Freebooters descended in decorated ships, demanded payment, and joined whichever war boss appeared most likely to provide a profitable fight. Stompus walked among them. Gargants moved behind. Their footfalls loosened stones from the mountains and knocked smaller buildings apart. Their gun decks were crowded with chanting mobs. Smoke poured from exhaust stacks shaped like skulls and snarling faces. The Overfiend's empire gathered until the valleys could not contain it. The clans began killing one another before the Tyranids arrived. A dispute over a bridge became a battle involving thousands. Bad Moons fired artillery into an Evil Sun's camp after one of their transports was stolen. A snakebite war boss released squigs into the Death Skull's lines because he suspected them of stealing his favorite beast. The fighting stopped only when the Overfiend's guns fired. Shells struck the mountainsides above the camps, bringing down avalanches of stone and scrap. Silence spread outward through the Orc host. The Overfiend appeared upon the highest platform of Gargates. Even at a distance, he was immense. Armor covered him in layers thick enough to turn aside anti-tank fire. Exhaust pipes rose from his back. His power claw was large enough to close around a battle wagon's engine block. A ragged cloak of hides and banners hung from his shoulders. Millions of Orcs looked up at him. He looked down at them. "Stop killing each other." A lone shot sounded somewhere in the valley. The Overfiend pointed. A fortress gun fired. The offending mob disappeared beneath an explosion. "Till the bugs get here," he added. The valleys erupted in laughter. Scabgob took Gorzad along the western passes to inspect the defenses. Flakadaka guns covered the ridgelines, their multi-barreled assemblies capable of filling the sky with enough metal to shred aircraft or collapse from recoil. Quad guns stood inside armored pits. Rocket towers rose from cliff faces, each loaded with crude missiles whose guidance systems consisted mostly of red paint and the shouted advice of their crews. Custom force field generators crackled around the larger emplacements. Their unstable barriers flashed into existence, vanished, and returned at unpredictable intervals. Grots carrying long poles were ordered to walk into them during testing. Some emerged, most did not. Shock attack guns were mounted upon rotating platforms. their humming machinery connected to cages of terrified snotlings. Artillery tractors dragged guns stolen from the Imperium, their Aquilas defaced by glyphs and blood. Entire scrap fortresses moved through the passes on tracks, crushing tents, grots, and slower vehicles beneath them. Scabgob spread his arms. "The best defenses in Octarius." One of the rocket towers fired during loading. The missile struck a nearby gun platform and detonated its ammunition stores. A column of flame climbed into the sky. Burning boys fell from the ridge. Gorzad watched the wreckage. Was that meant to happen? Scabgob scratched his chin. Worked, didn't it? The first mycetic spores appeared at midday. They entered the sky as black points. More followed. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became millions. The Orks saw them. A sound began in Gargates. It moved through the city, down the towers and across the valleys. Boys hammered weapons against armor. Knobs raised choppers. Mechs opened fuel lines and lit them. Gargant crews sounded horns made from industrial sirens and the bones of massive beasts. The Overfiend climbed onto the platform again. He did not offer strategy. He did not speak of supply lines, defensive depth, or acceptable losses. "There's enough bugs up there for every orc on this world," the host roared, "and when we've killed them, there'll be more." The roar became greater. "This is gonna be the biggest fight there ever was." The Overfiend raised his claw. "Wah!" Millions answered. The psychic force of the cry rolled across Octarius. Armor plates tore free from towers. Windows shattered. Grots collapsed, clutching their skulls. Engines activated without ignition keys. Weapons discharged from empty chambers. Green lightning crawled between the copper rods embedded in Zaplug's head. Gorzad felt the word inside his bones. It was not a sound. It was certainty. The Orks opened fire. The sky became a storm of ammunition. Mycetic spores burst beneath streams of shells. Some fell apart in the upper atmosphere. Others ruptured close enough for their contents to rain over the mountains. Gaunts struck the ground burning and rose to charge before their flesh stopped smoking. Then the clouds moved. They were not clouds. Gargoyles covered the sky in numbers too vast for distance to measure. Their wings beat against one another. Their weapon organisms spat living ammunition through the smoke. Their shadows passed across Gargates until the city appeared submerged beneath night. The Orc aircraft rose to meet them. Devcopters launched from every flat surface. Fighter bombers screamed between the towers, engines trailing fire. Stormboys activated rocket packs and shot upward in disordered mobs, several exploding before leaving the ground. The aerial war struck above the city. Gargoyles wrapped themselves around Devcopter rotors. Pilots rammed living creatures and continued flying with wings, limbs and teeth tangled in their machinery. Fighter bombers fired into the swarms until their guns overheated, then used their armored prows to tear paths through the bodies. Stormboys jumped from one target to another. One landed on a winged Tyranid, hacked off its head, and rode the falling body toward another brood. A second missed his intended creature and collided with a Devcopter, sending both Orcs spinning into a gun tower. Burning wreckage fell across the valleys. Aircraft, gargoyles, and Orcs struck the ground among the waiting armies. Thousands died beneath a battle occurring too high above them to understand. Gorzad's mob had been assigned to an anti-aircraft ridge. He hated it. The main Tyranid landing zones were beyond the mountains, where the horizon flashed with artillery and the ground shook beneath advancing monsters. Gorzad could hear the greater fight, but could not reach it. He kicked a grot from the ammunition hoist. "Load faster." "It's loaded, boss." "Then load it again." The flakka gun above them fired continuously. Its barrels glowed red. Shell cases poured from the breach in a metal waterfall. Gargoyles descended upon the ridge. They came through the gunfire in ragged waves, wings shredded, bodies torn open. Those that survived struck the emplacements with claws and teeth. Gorzad fired Scabgob's rebuilt shooter. Both barrels roared. The recoil drove him backward. A cluster of gargoyles came apart in the air, spraying blood and organs across the gun crew. The pressure chamber exploded. A plate struck Gorzad in the chest. He laughed. Good gun. The flakka barrels overheated and warped. One burst, cutting 3 boys apart with fragments of glowing metal. The remaining crews abandoned the controls and climbed the tower framework to reach the enemy. Gorzad followed. He hacked at gargoyles clinging to the supports. One tore open his thigh. He seized it by the neck and bit through its skull with his new iron jaw. The ridge shook. Something moved beneath it. Genestealers erupted from the tunnels. They came through ventilation shafts, ammunition stores and maintenance passages. Gun crews vanished into the darkness. Claws opened Orks from behind. One boy turned toward a sound and lost the entire front of his face. Gorzad jumped from the tower. He landed among the Genestealers and fired until his rebuilt shooter tore itself apart. He discarded it and drew his chopper. Down there! His mob followed him underground. The tunnels were too narrow for proper formations. Orks collided with one another. Genestealers moved across walls and ceilings, striking from angles the boys could not defend. Gunfire became useless. The Orks fought with choppers, knives, broken stocks and fists. Gorzad saw a Genestealer remove both arms from a boy, then tear his chest open before the body hit the ground. He struck the creature across the neck. The blade lodged between armor plates. The Genestealer turned. Gorzad drove forward, forcing it against the wall, and headbutted it until the iron plates of his jaw crushed its skull. Another attacked from behind. A boy intercepted it and lost his stomach. The creature's talons opened him so completely that his intestines spilled around Gorzad's boots. Gorzad caught one of the severed Tyranid limbs, gripped it by the wrist, and used its own claws to stab the next Genestealer through the throat. The tunnel became a slaughterhouse. When the last creature died, fewer than half the mob remained. Above them, the guns stopped one by one. Scabgob listened through the vox. North gun's gone. A moment later, another transmission died. Upper ridge too. A knob beside him spat blood. Sneaky bugs, cowards. Scabgob looked toward the pattern of silent emplacements. They ain't just sneaking, the knob laughed. Same thing. The final heavy gun ceased firing. The sky opened. Without the ridge batteries, twice as many mycetic spores descended through the gap. They struck the passes, slopes and valleys beyond Gargates. Each impact released fresh swarms into the heart of the Ork positions. Gorzad climbed from the tunnels. Smoke covered the mountains. Fire burned across the city. Tyranids moved over every road, ridge and ravine. The horizon shifted beneath them, just as it had on Orok. This time millions of Orks stood waiting. Gorzad looked upon the impossible number of enemies. He began to laugh. The sound spread through his surviving boys. It reached the gun crews, the Goths, the mobs below, and the armies beyond. Octarius roared. Beside him, Zaplug stood trembling, green light pouring from his eyes. Gorzad slapped the weird boy across the shoulder. See? Told you it could come get bitten. Zaplug watched the swarm turn toward Gargates. Every head changed direction within the same heartbeat. Every wing shifted. Every clawed body below began moving, as though one thought had entered them all. The weird boy's smile vanished. It ain't just coming, he whispered. Far beyond sight, something pressed against the inside of his skull. It's listening. The Octarian meat grinder years of war had made Gorzad Ironjaw difficult to recognize. He had once been a lean Goth with mismatched shoulder plates and a lower tusk punching through one cheek. Now he stood taller than the knob he had killed at Gargates. His spine bowed beneath slabs of armor taken from 3 species and half a dozen dead owners. The plate across his chest had once formed part of an Imperial battle tank. A scorched Aquila remained visible beneath black paint and white checks. Tyranid carapace covered his left shoulder, its violet surface drilled through and bolted directly to the metal beneath. His right arm carried the vambrace of a Bad Moon knob, whose hand Gorzad had removed during an argument over a captured venom cannon. The iron plates around his jaw had been replaced twice. The second set had broken against the skull of a Carnifex. The third had been forged from the teeth of a wrecked excavator and riveted through living bone, while Gorzad remained conscious enough to complain that Doc Riptooth was working too slowly. His boys had changed with him. They were broader, scarred, and thick with the brutal vitality that came from surviving a war without seasons. Some wore bionic limbs that whined when they moved. Others carried grafted plates of chitin, scavenged Imperial armor, or weapons built from components that should never have functioned together. Behind them lay Red Gob Trench. Ahead of them lay Red Gob Trench. The same ground had belonged to both armies so many times that ownership had ceased to matter. The Orks had dug it during the first year of the invasion, using artillery craters as foundations. Tyranids took it 3 days later and filled the firing steps with egg clusters. Gorzad's mob recaptured it with burners, cooked the nests, and renamed it after the grot, whose body had been used to block a drainage pipe. The swarm reclaimed it before the corpses cooled. The Orks returned with battle wagons. The Tyranids returned beneath the ground. The trench deepened with every bombardment and rose with every corpse. Chitin reinforced the walls. Ork bones became stepping stones. Rusted gun shields were welded onto rib cages, large enough to have belonged to monsters. Every assault added another layer until the original Earth lay buried beneath compacted flesh, armor, and spent ammunition. In later years, the trench ceased being a trench. It became a road. Battle wagons rolled across the dead, their wheels grinding old skeletons into the mud. Mobs marched over the remains of earlier mobs. Generations of gaunts were spawned, killed, dissolved, and spawned again upon the same strip of ground. The war no longer moved across Octarius. It fed upon itself. Gorzad stood behind a barricade made from Carnifex ribs and watched the newest wave emerge through yellow smoke. Hormagaunts came first. Their scything limbs struck the corpse road in a blur. They did not roar or threaten. They simply accelerated, bodies pressed together, leaping over the broken carcasses of the brood before them. The burner boys waited. Gorzad held up one fist. The boys trembled with impatience. Pilot flames hissed at the ends of their weapons. Promethium dripped from cracked tanks and pooled around their boots. "Not yet," Gorzad said. The Hormagaunts entered the trench. Rippers poured between them, small enough to disappear inside the bones underfoot. Some climbed the walls. Others vanished into drainage holes leading beneath the Ork position. Gorzad lowered his fist. "Now!" Fire filled Red Gob Trench. The burner boys swept their weapons from side to side. Promethium washed over the swarm, clinging to chitin and soft membranes. Hormagaunts became running torches. Rippers burst in the heat. The trench turned into a furnace lined with clawing silhouettes. The Orks laughed through the smoke. A burning gaunt cleared the barricade and struck one burner boy hard enough to knock him into his own fuel line. Gorzad grabbed the creature by the skull, snapped its neck, and threw it back into the flames. "Rippers under us!" shouted one boy. The ground erupted. Thousands of the feeder organisms poured through holes beneath the barricade. They climbed legs, forced themselves beneath armor, and chewed into flesh before the Orks could stamp them flat. The burner boys turned their weapons downward. Promethium consumed Rippers and Orks together. One boy continued firing after the flames reached the fuel tank on his back. The explosion removed him, 3 companions, and part of the barricade. Gorzad stepped through the fire. His armor blackened. The Tyranid plate on his shoulder softened at the edges. He crushed Rippers beneath his boots and drove his chopper through a Hormagaunt, attempting to rise. Behind him, tank busters moved toward the breach. They carried rocket launchers, tank hammers, bomb squigs, and sacks of explosives marked with glyphs none of them could read. Their knob had painted Carnifex jaws across his armor and wore one of the beast's talons as a hat. The ground shook beyond the smoke. A Carnifex charged. Its armor was thicker than the specimens that had attacked during the first years. Heavy ridges covered its head and shoulders. Scar tissue sealed old wounds beneath new chitin. Its crushing claws opened and closed as it came, each impact of its feet breaking the corpse road. The tank busters cheered. Rockets struck the creature. Explosions covered its face and chest. One shell shattered against the carapace without penetrating. Another drove between two armor plates and tore out a length of pulsing tissue. The Carnifex did not slow. A bomb squig raced toward it, tongue flapping, explosives strapped across its back. The creature lowered its head and swallowed the squig whole. The detonation expanded its throat. Black blood sprayed from its mouth. It kept charging. The tank buster Nob planted his tank hammer in the center of the trench and braced both feet. The Carnifex struck him. The hammerhead exploded on impact, taking one of the monster's forelimbs and most of the Nob's upper body. The Carnifex rolled through the barricade, crushing Orks beneath its weight. Gorzad climbed onto it before it stopped moving. He drove his chopper into the wound left by the tank hammer. The blade struck bone. He tore it free and hacked again. The Carnifex surged upright. Gorzad held on with one hand, roaring as it slammed him against the trench wall. Chitin cracked beneath his blows. He buried the chopper to its handle and twisted until the creature's movements became jerks. The tank busters piled onto it. They hammered armor, shoved explosives into wounds, and argued over who had killed it. A venom cannon fired from beyond the smoke. The living projectile struck the corpse. The Carnifex burst beneath Gorzad. Acid, bone, and armor fragments filled the trench. Two tank busters disappeared. Another staggered away without a face. Gorzad rose from the remains with half the Carnifex's jaw hanging from his shoulder. He tore it free. They made the big ones tougher. One of his boys wiped black blood from his eyes. Means we're winning. That was the Ork answer to every adaptation. The Tyranids had grown thicker armor because Ork weapons were killing them. They had developed sharper senses because commandos were destroying their spawning pits. Their toxins had changed because ordinary venoms failed to kill greenskins quickly enough. Every improvement was interpreted as proof that the enemy feared them. For a time, the Orks developed answers faster than the hive mind could replace the questions. Burner mobs learned where ripper nests gathered beneath the corpse fields. Tank busters mapped the hunting routes of Carnifex broods. Beast snaggers rode through artillery fire to challenge the largest organisms, impaling warriors with hooked spears and dragging wounded monsters behind squigosaurs. Bloodaxe commandos penetrated the feeding grounds at night. They painted their armor with mud and Tyranid blood, crawled through capillary forests, and planted charges inside spawning chambers. One commando returned wearing the feeder tendrils of a dead lictor as a scarf and claimed he had strangled the creature while asleep. Each success became a story. Each story became louder. Each retelling made the Orks more certain that victory was inevitable. The hive mind did not tell stories. It remembered results. Burners began attracting organisms whose carapaces sweated fire-resistant slime. Tank busters found Carnifexes moving beneath clouds of spore organisms that detonated incoming rockets. Commandos entered spawning pits and discovered creatures without eyes, waiting for them in perfect darkness. The swarm changed what it killed first. Gaunts no longer threw themselves at the nearest boy. They bypassed the front ranks and attacked ammunition carriers. Raveners emerged beneath mech workshops. Gargoyles struck painboy stations. Lictors hunted nobs and vanished before the mobs could retaliate. The war became more precise. The Orks became larger. Gorzad felt both truths every time Red Gob Trench changed hands. Zaplug Headbanger arrived during the 23rd assault of the current season, dragged behind an armored wagon by 6 Minder grots and a chain wrapped around his throat. Green lightning crawled across his skin. His eyes bulged. Blood ran from his nose. Every blast of gunfire made his skull rods hum. "Get him closer!" shouted Gorzad. The Minder grots stopped. One shook its head. "He's full, boss." "Full of what?" "Wah!" Zaplug bent double. A pulse of green light traveled through the trench. Weapons discharged. Engines stalled. An Ork beside Gorzad vanished from the waist upward and reappeared several paces away, fused into the barricade. The weird boy screamed. It was not the scream of an orc in pain. It was the sound of millions of violent thoughts attempting to escape through one skull. The Tyranid line advanced through the smoke. Warriors moved behind the gaunts, their synaptic crests pulsing. Larger organisms followed, their collective shadow pressed. Against Zaplug's mind, from the other side of the battlefield, he looked up. Too many voices. Gorzad grabbed the iron collar around his neck. Point 'em that way. I can't hold it. Den don't. Zaplug opened his mouth. Green fire erupted. The blast crossed Red Gob Trench and tore through the advancing swarm. Hormagaunts became black silhouettes before disintegrating. Warriors burst inside their armor. A carnifex vanished beneath a column of incandescent energy that carved a glass-lined channel through the corpse road. The sky above the front split with thunder. Every orc cheered. Then reality folded. Gorzad felt the ground disappear. For a heartbeat, he existed inside cold, green darkness, filled with distant laughter and shapes too large for sight. Then the world returned. He was no longer inside Red Gob Trench. He stood upon a field of pulsing membranes behind the Tyranid lines. A dozen of his boys appeared around him. One arrived upside down and broke his neck against the ground. Another had fused with his own shooter, metal growing through his ribs and jaw. He fired once before the weapon exploded inside his chest. The surviving orcs looked around. Tyranid warriors surrounded them. Gorzad laughed. Zaplug found us a good bit. The warriors attacked. Their bone zords fell in coordinated arcs. One boy lost both arms and half his skull before he could raise his weapon. Another fired into the chest of a warrior until the creature's blade opened him from shoulder to hip. Gorzad drove his mob into a circle. Backs together. The command was strange enough to silence them. Orcs preferred to face whatever they intended to kill. They did not naturally protect one another's flanks. Gorzad struck the nearest boy across the head. Do it. They formed a ring. The warriors came from every direction. Gorzad's boys fired outward until their weapons emptied, then fought with choppers, knives, and fists. The circle contracted as orcs died. A bone zord pierced Gorzad's chest plate and cut into the muscle beneath. He trapped the blade under one arm. The warrior tried to pull free. Gorzad stepped closer and bit through its throat. Black fluid flooded his mouth. He tore away flesh until the creature's head sagged. Beyond the ring stood the largest synapse beast. Its cranial crest pulsed with psychic light. Tendrils of control passed outward through the surrounding broods. Gaunts moved in response to impulses no orc could perceive. Gorzad perceived size. That was enough. "That one's mine." He broke from the circle. 3 warriors moved to intercept him. One severed the plates from his shoulder. Another drove a blade through his thigh. Gorzad ripped the weapon from the creature's grasp, used it to split the next warrior's skull, and continued limping forward. The synapse organism fired. A living projectile struck his abdomen and burrowed under the armor. Gorzad punched through the plate with his own fingers, caught the writhing thing beneath his skin, and tore it out with a fistful of flesh. He threw it back. Then he reached the creature. His chopper broke against its crest. Gorzad seized one of its lower limbs, planted a boot against its torso, and pulled. The joint ruptured. He used the severed limb as a club, hammering the crest until the armor split. The final blow opened the skull. The synapse pulse ended. Nearby, gaunts convulsed. Several fled. Others attacked the nearest movement without coordination. The warriors hesitated long enough for distant artillery to strike their position. Orc shells fell among them. The bombardment belonged to another offensive advancing from Red Gob Trench. Gorzad climbed from the crater, carrying the synapse creature's head. His surviving boys followed. When they returned to the orc lines, the story grew before they finished telling it. By nightfall, Gorzad had killed a creature larger than a gargant. By morning, he had punched through the hive mind itself. Scabgob mounted the creature's head above his workshop door and charged visitors' teeth to look at it. The big mech's experiments had become more ambitious. Venom sacs were drained into artillery shells and fitted with impact charges. Tyranid carapaces became armor plates for battle wagons. Living guns were wired into crude control frames and forced to fire through pain. Grots were used to test everything. One was strapped to a captured weapon symbiote, while Scabgob connected wires to its exposed nerves. The creature convulsed, fired a stream of beetle-like ammunition, and consumed the grot holding its trigger chain. Scabgob nodded thoughtfully. "Needs a longer handle." Doc Riptooth worked in the chamber beside him. He reattached arms with industrial staples. He replaced missing organs with squig tissue, pumps, tubing, and parts removed from other patients. One wounded knob arrived without a lower leg and left with a rocket launcher fitted beneath the knee. The weapon fired when he sneezed. Riptooth called the operation a success. "Most of them live," he explained to Gorzad. A patient died behind him when a grafted Tyranid gland ruptured and dissolved his spine. Riptooth looked back. Some don't. Far above Octarius, an Imperial observation vessel watched the war through long-range augers. The strategium remained dark, except for the hololithic display. Crimson tendrils marked the Tyranid advance. Green concentrations identified Ork warbands, fleets and reinforcements arriving from systems light years away. An Ordo Xenos savant stood before the projection. The mean body mass of the surviving greenskin warrior strain has increased again. The Deathwatch officer beside him studied the Tyranid signatures. And the Hive fleet. Greater carapace density, revised toxin profiles, improved target discrimination. Their reclamation efficiency has risen in every recorded theater. The officer looked toward Octarius. Cryptman intended attrition. He achieved refinement. Which side is weakening? The savant did not answer immediately. Neither. Below them, the guns of Octarius fell silent. Not all at once. One front stopped firing, then another. Tyranid attacks diminished across hundreds of kilometers. Gaunts withdrew. Artillery organisms vanished into capillary forests. Winged broods turned away from exposed Ork positions. The quiet spread. Orks climbed from their trenches in confusion. Some fired into the empty ground. Others advanced without orders, searching caves, corpse fields, and abandoned feeding grounds for something to fight. Gorzad stood upon Red Gob Road and listened to a silence deeper than bombardment. Zaplug collapsed beside him. The weird boy struck the ground hard enough to bend the rods in his skull. His limbs locked. Green foam spilled between his teeth. Gorzad rolled him onto his back. "What is it?" Zaplug's eyes opened. They were filled with darkness. "Something's waiting." "Where?" "Behind all of them." The weird boy seized Gorzad's armor with both hands. "It knows the burners, knows the rockets, knows the sneaky gits and the big beasts." His grip tightened until the metal creaked. "It's learning the shape of every win." Across the dead world, the Tyranid lines remained still. Something greater than the swarm was studying what endless war had made. The warp split above Octarius like an axe driven into rotten meat. There was no warning from the Weird Boy towers, no orderly scream from the astropaths chained within captured Imperial hulls, no mech alarm, no lookout's bellow, no flare from the void sentries. One moment, the outer system belonged to the dead. The next, it was full of Orks. Killwrecker emerged first. The colossal battleship did not so much translate into real space as punch through it. Green lightning crawled over its armored flanks. Whole sections of its hull were still wrapped in warp fire when its engines ignited, hurling it forward before the laws of reality had finished accepting its presence. Rocks followed. Asteroids hollowed into fortresses, rolled from the wound in space, gunports already flashing. Kill cruisers appeared between them, some sideways, some spinning, several colliding before their Geller fields fully collapsed. One lesser vessel materialized across the prow of another and came apart in a storm of crew, fuel, and armor. The surviving ships opened fire, not because they had identified targets, because there were targets nearby. Tyranid organisms died in their thousands beneath the first barrage. Bioships that had gathered around Octarius turned toward the new threat as macro shells, rockets, and crackling energy blasts tore through their living armor. One vessel had its feeder tendrils severed and drifted blind into an Ork rock. The rock's engines flared. It rammed the creature head-on, burying fortress guns inside its thorax before every weapon discharged at once. The explosion brightened half the system. On the surface, every Ork looked up. Gorzad Ironjaw stood upon the armor roof of a battle wagon and watched the sky burn green. His boys filled the valley below him. They were veterans of Red Gob Trench, survivors of the Western Ridge and the Corpse Road. They carried scars from Genestealers, Gaunts, Carnifexes, and the surgical enthusiasm of Doc Riptooth. Most were larger than the warriors who had first marched beneath the Overfiend's banners. Gorzad was larger than all of them. He had begun to think of that often. He had killed Nobs. He had broken Synapse creatures. He had returned from behind the Tyranid lines, carrying the head of something the other boys claimed had controlled the whole swarm. War bosses were only Nobs who had not yet met anyone strong enough to kill them. Gorzad considered this a temporary condition. "What is it?" asked one of his boys. Gorzad watched the shapes falling from the upper atmosphere. "Reinforcements." "Whose?" "Mine, if they've got any sense. The first landers struck beyond Gargates. They came down without choosing landing grounds. Heavy transports smashed into Ork camps, crushing tents, vehicles and mobs beneath their hulls. Rocks descended on roaring engines, breaking mountain ridges and scattering avalanches into the valleys. Orks poured from every opening. They wore black armor, red armor, rusted armor, and no armor at all. Some carried banners bearing crude glyphs of Gork and Mork. Others painted the same snarling face across their plates and shields. The face belonged to Gazgkul Mag Uruk Thraka, the prophet of the Wa. His name moved through the Ork armies faster than any Vox signal. Some boys had heard it on Armageddon. Others knew it from freebooter tales, weird boy visions, and the boasts of mobs that claimed to have fought beneath him. By the time Gorzad reached the gathering plain, the number of Orks waiting there could no longer be judged by sight. They covered the ground from the walls of Gargates to the lower mountain passes, climbing vehicles, gun towers, and one another to see. Gorzad forced his way forward. Those who refused to move were struck aside. Those who struck back discovered that his iron jaw could close through fingers and wrist bones. His boys followed behind, widening the path. He intended to see the prophet. Then he intended to judge whether the prophet deserved the name. Gazkul stood upon the wreck of a battle wagon. The vehicle had not been destroyed in battle. It had been crushed beneath one of his feet because it occupied the place he wished to stand. He towered above war bosses. Armor enclosed him like a moving fortress. Pistons drove beneath layered plates. Cables and exhaust stacks rose from his back. His iron gob was brutal enough to resemble a weapon in its own right. One arm ended in a power claw large enough to tear open a dreadnought. The other carried a firearm whose barrels could have served as artillery pieces. Yet it was not the weapons that silenced Gorzad. It was the way the other Orks looked at him. War bosses who would have killed their own mobs over a careless glance stood motionless. Nobs lowered their weapons. Mechs stopped arguing. Even the Overfiend's lieutenants waited, rather than demanding attention. Gazkul had not drawn a weapon. He did not need to. The Wa gathered around him like a storm held inside flesh. Gorzad felt it pressing into his skull. Every violent thought he possessed seemed louder in the prophet's presence. He wanted to charge, to kill, to follow, to prove himself before the entire species. For the first time in years, Gorzad did not imagine challenging the largest Ork before him. The ambition did not vanish. It merely understood distance. Gazkul turned his head. For one impossible moment, Gorzad believed the prophet was looking directly at him. Then the ground opened. Stone, wreckage, and bodies erupted into the air. A Morlock burst through the gathering. Its armored head struck beneath a cluster of battle wagons and hurled them spinning into the crowd. Jaws opened wide enough to swallow entire mobs. Orks disappeared between rows of inward curving teeth. The beast's body followed, rising from the earth in coils of chitin, blood and grinding muscle. It landed across the plain and crushed hundreds. The gathering became a battle. Boys fired from every direction. Most shots struck other orcs. Rockets burst against the Morlock's armor or vanished into its mouth. One warboss charged and was bitten in half, his legs continuing forward after his torso disappeared. Gazkul jumped from the wrecked battle wagon. He did not order anyone else to attack. He ran toward the Morlock. The beast plunged into the earth. Rock closed behind it. Gazkul stopped. The entire plane held its breath. Zaplug Headbanger stood near Gorzad, shaking so violently that the rods through his skull rang together. "It's under him." The ground beneath Gazkul bulged. He remained still. The Morlock erupted with its jaws open. Gazkul stepped into the attack. His power claw closed around one of the creature's mandibles. The impact drove his boots into the stone. The beast rose beneath him, trying to swallow, but the Prophet locked his other hand against the opposite jaw and held the mouth open. The Morlock twisted. Armored coils smashed through mobs, guns and vehicles. Its claws raked across Gazkul's plate, tearing away chunks of metal. Acidic saliva poured over him and hissed against the armor. He roared, not in pain, in challenge. The Wah answered. Green lightning flashed across the plain. Engines turned over without fuel. Weapons fired from empty chambers. Every orc bellowed the same word until the mountain walls shook. Gazkul forced the Morlock's jaws wider. Muscle tore inside its throat. Chitin cracked along the hinges. The beast thrashed hard enough to kill thousands around him. The Prophet did not release it. He tore the mandible free. Black blood erupted across his armor. The Morlock recoiled, mouth ruined. Gazkul drove the severed jaw through the soft tissue beneath its skull, buried it to the base and pulled sideways. The creature's throat opened, its body convulsed. Gazkul climbed onto its head as it collapsed and fired his weapon into the wound until the Morlock stopped moving. Silence held for one heartbeat. Then Octarius went mad. Boys screamed his name. Knobs struck one another in excitement. Weird boys vomited green fire into the sky. Mechs claimed every machine on the planet had worked better at the exact moment of the kill. The story changed before the corpse cooled. Gorzad heard one boy swear Gazkul had strangled the Morlock with its own innards. Another insisted the Prophet had bitten through its head. A snakebite claimed Gork had held the beast, while Mork whispered where to stab. A bad moon argued that Gazkul had paid the creature to attack, so everyone could watch him kill it. The contradictions spread. None weakened the truth the Orks wanted. Gazkul had arrived. The greatest enemy on the field had attacked him. He had killed it. The Wah grew. The Prophet did not celebrate for long. He inspected the war. Gazkul walked the lines of Octarius, while war bosses followed like chastened boys. He entered the western fortresses, Red Gob Road, the Mech Valleys, and the artillery heights. He looked at wrecked guns, empty magazines, exposed fuel dumps, and mobs positioned where no enemy had attacked for months. He found 3 clans fighting over a Prometheum pipeline. "Who owns it?" he asked. All 3 war bosses answered. Gazkul shot 2. The third immediately claimed the others had agreed it belonged to him. The Prophet struck him hard enough to embed his skull in the pipeline. Now no one owns it. The mechs do. He found artillery crews firing at distant spores without spotters. "Stop wasting shells." The gun boss puffed out his chest. "We got plenty." Gazkul looked toward the ammunition pits. Most were empty. He picked up the gun boss and threw him into one. "Now you got one more." He found mobs being sent directly against Tyranid gun beasts across open ground. Their war boss called it courage. Gazkul called it stupid. The war boss objected. The Prophet broke his spine across one knee and gave the mob to someone else. His commands were not complicated. He pointed speed freaks toward the valleys containing the fastest prey. Ride past them, make them chase. He sent blood axe commandos into the capillary forests. Find the big head bugs. Don't start shooting till you know where all of them are. He directed Goths toward the mountain passes. Wait till the guns stop, then smash what's left. He spoke to the mechs last. I want that whole valley to explode. Scab-Gob Volt-Crumper squinted at the map scratched into a slab of armor. Which bit? All of it. Scab-Gob's grin widened. The counter-offensive began at dawn. Evil Sun's buggies crossed the Sumpjaw Valley in a red blur. Warbikes screamed around Tyranid formations, firing wildly and throwing crude explosives into the broods. Carnifexes turned to pursue them. That had never happened before. Orc mobs usually charged the Carnifexes. The speed freaks raced away. They shouted insults over their shoulders, fired rockets backward, and drove close enough for claws to tear armor from their vehicles. One buggy lost both rear wheels and continued forward on momentum, its crew still firing as it overturned. The Carnifex brood followed them into the valley. Blood axe markers flashed from the cliffs. Gazkul raised one fist. The artillery opened. Shells fell in overlapping waves. Looted Imperial guns fired beside cannon batteries, lobus, and shock attack guns. The valley disappeared beneath explosions. Chitin shattered. Carnifexes vanished in sprays of black blood and pulverized bone. Zaplug screamed from an iron cage bolted to a stomper's shoulder. Green energy erupted from his skull rods and struck the synapse organisms beyond the valley. Warriors convulsed. Gaunts broke formation. The controlling pressure of the hive mind flickered. The stompers advanced. Their guns hammered the trapped broods. One fired a belly-mounted cannon into the cliff and buried itself beneath the resulting avalanche. Another lost an arm to bioplasma, picked it up with the remaining hand, and used it as a club. Then Gazkul lowered his fist. The Goths charged. Gorzad led his mob down the western slope. Artillery fire still fell ahead of them. The proper moment to advance had not quite arrived. That made the charge better. They entered the smoke among falling debris. Half-dead gaunts clawed through churned earth. Warriors staggered without clear synaptic control. Carnifexes emerged from the bombardment with armor split and organs exposed. The Orks hit them from every side. Gorzad's boys hacked through gaunts before the creatures recovered. Tank busters drove explosive charges into wounded monsters. Burner boys washed capillary growths with promethium, filling the valley with the smell of cooked Xeno's flesh. A Carnifex rose before Gorzad. Its lower body had been crushed beneath a stomper shell. One claw remained. Half its head was missing. The exposed brain pulsed beneath broken armor. It tried to drag itself toward him. Gorzad threw away his empty shooter. Still want some? The creature struck. Its claw closed around his left arm and crushed armor into flesh. Gorzad drove forward rather than pulling away. He climbed the limb, reached the creature's shoulder, and buried his chopper inside the broken skull. The Carnifex convulsed. He hacked again. The brain ruptured beneath the blade. The monster collapsed. Gorzad stood on its head and raised his weapon. The mountain passes answered with Orc cheers. For the first time since the opening years of the war, the Tyranid lines withdrew across the entire region. Several passes were reclaimed before nightfall. Capillary towers burned. Spawning pits were collapsed. Orc banners rose above ground that had belonged to the swarm for years. The celebration began before the wounded were counted. Gorzad watched boys drag Tyranid carcasses into piles and argue over trophies. He saw mobs fire ammunition into the air and mechs dismantle captured organisms before confirming they were dead. The war had changed. He could feel it. The swarm had been broken. Then the first stomper vanished. It crossed a reclaimed road and dropped through the ground. Burrowing organisms had hollowed the stone beneath it. The machine fell into the tunnels, crushing its own support mobs and blocking the route. Winged broods struck the fuel depots during the celebration. Gargoyles descended through the smoke, ignoring the Orc infantry and setting the Prometheum reserves alight. Fire spread through the supply valleys. The synapse organisms changed formation. No longer gathered in obvious clusters, they dispersed among smaller broods, hiding control nodes across the battlefield. Weird Boy attacks that had broken whole sectors now disrupted only fragments. Gazkul watched the new formations from a command ridge. He did not rage at the adaptation. He laughed. Clever. The war boss beside him looked confused. Day ran. Day learned. Gazkul turned toward the horizon. Means they're worth fighting again. His declaration of victory came 3 days later. He stood before the assembled clans with the dead Morlock's mandible chained across his armor. Behind him, his armada prepared to leave. Rocks rose from the valleys. Kill cruisers broke orbit. Thousands of orc mobs fought for space aboard them. Gazkul spoke of a greater War. He promised worlds without end, enemies greater than any one planet could hold, and a war large enough to shake the stars. Those who followed him roared until the ship's armor vibrated. The strongest mobs went first. Veteran knobs, speed freaks, gargant crews, mechs with the best machines, war bosses eager to prove themselves beneath the prophet's gaze. Gorzad remained. He watched Killwrecker climb into the sky. Around him, the armies of Octarius celebrated what Gazkul had left behind. Reclaimed passes, shattered broods, and the belief that the Tyranids could be beaten.
Remember, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support helps.
See, Gorzad said. We don't need him. Zaplug stood beside him, staring upward. The weird boy's face was grey beneath the green skin. Blood leaked from the rods in his skull. Gorzad struck his shoulder. What's wrong with you? Zaplug watched the last of Gazkul's ships vanish into the dark. Far beyond the burning valleys, the Tyranid swarms shifted, not attacking, not retreating, remembering. The big bug knows he's gone, Zaplug whispered. Darmor had forgotten the color of its own soil. The planet's valleys were paved in bodies, not scattered corpses, nor the aftermath of a single battle, but geological strata of slaughter compacted by years of tracks, claws, and iron-shod boots. Orc bones lay crushed into Tyranid carapaces. Armor plates protruded from mounds of fused flesh. Broken weapons, severed limbs, and fragments of wrecked engines formed ridges that shifted beneath the weight of advancing armies. Battle wagons traveled over the dead because no road remained beneath them. Their wheels ground skulls into greasy fragments. Exhausts coughed soot across plains, already blackened by burning digestion pits. Boys leaned from fighting platforms, firing shooters at anything that moved beneath the vehicles. Sometimes the movement was a wounded gaunt. Sometimes it was another orc, trapped waist-deep in the corpse layers. No one stopped to check. The mountains surrounding Darmor rose in crooked rows, like the teeth of some buried predator. Between them, artillery fire flashed continuously. Gargants bombarded Tyranid positions beyond the horizon. Bio-titans answered with living projectiles that screamed through the atmosphere and burst into clouds of corrosive spores. The ground shook beneath every exchange. Gorzad Ironjaw stood at the prow of his battle wagon and watched a ruined stomper disappear beneath the living tide. The machine had lost both arms. Its head hung sideways, one glowing eye still firing uncontrolled bursts into the swarm. Hormagaunts climbed its legs. Larger organisms hacked through the armor around its knees. A carnifex drove its head into the weakened joint and tore the limb away. The stomper toppled. Its crew continued shooting as it fell. The impact buried thousands of gaunts and hundreds of orcs beneath metal, burning fuel and wreckage. Before the smoke cleared, fresh Tyranid broods flowed over it. Gorzad grinned. Good place. His driver looked back through a slit in the armor. Which way, boss? Gorzad examined the valley. Orc mobs fought on every slope. Some charged toward the Tyranids. Others fought one another over abandoned guns. Gaunts emerged between the tribes from holes hidden beneath the corpse fields. Gargoyles descended upon both armies. A wounded hierodule dragged itself through the valley, while Lutas clambered across its back, attempting to remove a weapon organism without killing it. There was no front. There was no rear. "Dat way." The driver looked in the direction of Gorzad's chopper. "There's bugs that way." "Yeah." "And orcs." "Yeah." "And a big stompy thing." Gorzad leaned down. "Drive." The battle wagon accelerated. It struck a ridge of skulls and lifted from the ground. "Boys," roared as the vehicle crashed into the melee. Its reinforced prow smashed through gaunts, armor, and bodies. A Tyranid warrior turned toward them and disappeared beneath the wheels. Gorzad jumped before the wagon stopped. His boots struck the back of a termagant. The creature burst beneath his weight. He fired his rebuilt shooter into a brood at arm's length, the weapon bucking hard enough to bruise his shoulder beneath the armor. His mob followed. They hacked into Tyranids, Orks, and anything too slow to identify itself. A Death Skull boy protested when one of Gorzad's warriors split his head. "He was blue," the warrior explained. "Should have been black," Gorzad said. A shadow passed over the valley. At first, Gorzad assumed another Tyranid flyer had descended through the smoke. Then the shadow grew. Something entered the upper atmosphere trailing fire. The vessel was long, brutal, and armored in red and brass. Its prow had been built into the likeness of a fanged skull. Chains hung from its flanks, carrying trophies large enough to have belonged to war engines. Batteries along its hull fired before the ship had completed its descent. The first broadside struck an Ork cruiser above Darmor. The second tore open a Tyranid bioship. The red vessel did not alter course to avoid either wreck. It rammed through the collapsing Ork ship, emerged from the debris, and drove directly into the wounded bioship. Chitin and adamantium folded together. The void filled with frozen blood, ruptured organs, and burning fuel. More ships followed. They were smaller, though no less violent. Their hulls carried the same colors. Brass icons rose from their armor. Boarding claws opened and dropcraft detached in swarms. The World Eaters had come to Darmor. Their landers did not search for defensible ground. They did not establish supply zones, fortifications, or evacuation corridors. They followed the largest concentrations of life and descended into them. One dropcraft struck a battlefield beyond Gorzad's position. Its impact crater swallowed Orks and Gaunts alike. Assault ramps fell before the dust settled. Red-armored giants charged from within. Their chain axes screamed. The first warrior struck an Ork knob and cut through shoulder plate, ribs, and spine in one downward blow. A second buried his chain blade in a Tyranid warrior's thorax and continued sawing until the creature came apart. Brass and crimson armor vanished beneath sprays of green and black blood. The butcher's nails drove them forward. The implants buried within their skulls turned restraint into pain and violence into release. They did not fire unless distance denied them the axe. They did not advance in formations so much as converge upon worthy bodies. "Blood!" one roared through his vox grill. "Skulls!" answered another. Their war cry spread across the valley. Gorzad listened. "Loud beakies!" A World Eater turned toward him. The warrior's helm was shaped around flaring brass crests. Chains hung from his breastplate, each link threaded through teeth and finger bones. His chain axe was clogged with Tyranid matter. He pointed the weapon at Gorzad. "Xenos!" Gorzad raised his chopper. "Red Git!" A Carnifex charged between them. The monster hit a cluster of boys and World Eaters together. One Chaos Space Marine vanished beneath its claw, armor collapsing around his body with a wet metallic crack. The Carnifex threw the corpse into Gorzad's mob and lowered its head for another attack. Gorzad and the World Eater charged at the same time. The Ork struck the creature's knee. His chopper broke through a thinner joint beneath the armor. The World Eater leapt onto its back and drove his chain axe between two carapace plates. The teeth found flesh and filled the air with shredded tissue. Other Orks joined them. More berserkers followed. For several heartbeats, the two forces fought as one. Rockets burst against the Carnifex's chest, chain blades carved into its flanks. Gorzad seized a loosened armor plate and tore it away with both hands. A World Eater plunged his gauntlet into the opening and ripped out a bundle of pulsating organs. The Carnifex collapsed. The World Eater climbed from the corpse. Gorzad shot him in the face. The first round shattered one eye lens. The second knocked the warrior backward. Gorzad leapt across the Carnifex and brought his chopper down upon the damaged helm. The World Eater caught the blade. His chain axe struck Gorzad's chest and tore through the outer plate. Gorzad drove his forehead into the Marine's face. The iron plates of his jaw crushed the cracked grill inward. The surrounding Orks and Berserkers turned upon one another before the Carnifex's death spasms ended. Gorzad considered the arrangement entirely proper. The Tyranids did not. Broods withdrew from the neighboring valleys, not in rout, not in fear. They vanished behind the ridges, leaving Orks and World Eaters alone among the corpses. The Orks pursued the red-armored warriors. The World Eaters welcomed them. Axes met choppers. Bolters fired into dense mobs. Power fists burst Orks apart inside their armor. Knobs dragged Berserkers down beneath weight of numbers and hacked at them until the chain axes stopped moving. The absence of Tyranids went unnoticed until the spore mines arrived. They drifted from behind the mountains in swollen clusters. Some floated above the battlefield on gas-filled sacks. Others crawled through the corpse layers on feeder tendrils. The first detonated among a mob of fighting Orks. Acidic fragments passed through green bodies and red plate alike. A Berserker lost both legs and continued firing his bolt pistol from the ground. An Ork Nob seized him by one arm and used the crippled warrior as a club. Biovores fired from concealed positions. Living artillery organisms expelled spores in high arcs. They landed among the exhausted combatants, rupturing into toxin clouds and clouds of razor-edged parasites. The ground opened. Raveners emerged beneath the melee. Their talons tore upward through boots, greaves, and legs. One erupted directly beneath a World Eater, splitting him from groin to throat. Another dragged 3 Orks into the corpse layers before any of them could turn. The swarm returned from every direction. It had permitted the other armies to exhaust themselves. Now it came to harvest them. Gorzad saw the trap only after the ridges filled with gaunts. He laughed. Clever bugs. A roar greater than artillery rolled through the valley. The Hierophant came through the mountains. It towered over Gargants. Its legs rose like fortress pylons, each joint protected by layered armor. Biocannons fused to its body, swelled and discharged, vomiting streams of organisms and corrosive fluid across the battlefield. One shot struck an Ork tank column. Battle wagons dissolved beneath the blast. Their crews became blackened skeletons inside softening armor. Fuel and ammunition ignited a moment later, spreading fire beneath the Titan's shadow. The Hierophant advanced. Gargants turned their weapons toward it. Shells broke against its carapace. Energy beams burned trenches across its armor. One Gargant fired every gun along its left side and tore open a wound beneath the creature's thorax. The Hierophant answered with bioplasma. The blast struck the Gargant's head. Metal ran like wax. The machine staggered, took 2 more steps, and collapsed upon an Ork army. Warboss Magza da Colossus watched from the back of a moving fortress. He was enormous, even among the rulers of Darmor. Layers of scavenged armor covered him from throat to boots. His iron gob carried tusks taken from a squiggoth. In both hands, he carried an axe built from a power generator, a chain drive and a blade broad enough to decapitate a tank. Magza saw the Hierophant. The world diminished around it. "That one's mine." His knobs roared agreement. Gargant guns fired over them as Magza led the charge. The warboss crossed the corpse field beneath a storm of Tyranid fire. His bodyguard died around him. One knob vanished beneath a biocannon discharge. Another lost his head to a warrior and continued running for several paces. Magza did not slow. A Hierophant leg struck the ground before him. The impact hurled Orks and Gaunts into the air. Magza jumped onto the limb. His axe bit into the armor. The power field flashed. Chain teeth shrieked. Chitin split beneath the blow, and black blood poured over the war boss. The Hierophant lifted its leg. Magza held on. He drove the axe deeper, while the Titan shook him above the battlefield. Gargant fire struck around him, bursting armor and flesh from the creature's flanks. Bioplasma gathered beneath the Hierophant's thorax. The blast swallowed Magza's bodyguard. Green bodies became incandescent vapor. Armor fragments rained across the dead. Magza's own plate burned, but he remained attached to the Titan's leg. He tore the axe free and struck again. The Hierophant impaled him. A secondary limb punched through his abdomen, shattered his spine, and emerged between the plates of his back. The war boss roared, struck the limb once, and raised the axe for another blow. The Titan smashed him into the ground. Magza disappeared beneath its claw. When the limb rose, the war boss was no longer shaped like an orc. His armor had folded into his body. Blood, organs, and shattered bone filled the imprint beneath the Titan's foot. His axe remained intact. Voda Bloodprice found it. The World Eater commander strode through the slaughter with his chain axe in one hand and a severed Tyranid head chained to his belt. His red armor had been blackened by fire and coated in blood from dozens of species. The brass of his helm bore the scars of centuries. The butcher's nails hammered inside his skull. Every heartbeat brought pain. Every kill brought silence. He looked upon the Hierophant and heard the nails scream for more. Not victory, not survival. A skull. A skull vast enough to drown an altar in blood. Bloodprice saw Magza's axe beneath the Titan. He cast aside his own weapon. The orc axe required both of his hands. Its haft was too thick for a mortal warrior and poorly balanced even for an orc. The power field flickered around the blade. Bloodprice lifted it. Blood for the blood god. The Hierophant turned. Its guns fired. Bloodprice ran through the barrage. World Eaters followed him because the largest kill had chosen their lord. Orcs followed because the red-armored warrior had stolen Magza's weapon. Tyranids converged because the hive mind recognized a new concentration of threat. The armies collided beneath the Titan. Bloodprice reached its wounded leg. He struck the split Magza had opened. The axe buried itself deep inside the joint. The Hierophant screamed. Its limb buckled. The Titan's fall began slowly, too vast for the eye to understand. One side of its body lowered. Weapon symbiotes continued firing. A biocannon discharged into its own supporting broods, reducing thousands of gaunts to slurry. Bloodprice tore the axe free. He climbed. The Hierophant's limbs struck around him. One blow crushed an entire pack of berserkers. Another swept through Gorzad's mob, breaking bodies and throwing orcs across the battlefield. Gorzad landed beneath the wreck of a war truck. He pulled himself free and looked up. Bloodprice reached the Titan's upper carapace. The World Eater drove the axe down. Once, the blade cracked armor. Twice, it cut through supporting bone. A third strike opened the Hierophant's skull. Bloodprice plunged both hands into the wound and pulled. The armor separated. The Titan reared. Its bioplasma organ ruptured. Fire burst through its body. Internal pressure tore weapon limbs from their sockets. Burning fluids rained upon the armies below. Bloodprice disappeared inside the opened skull. The axe continued moving. The Hierophant collapsed. Its mass struck the valley like a falling fortress. Orcs, Tyranids, and World Eaters vanished beneath it. Corpse layers erupted outward in waves. Mountains of compacted bodies were thrown into the air. The impact shook weapons from the hands of armies several valleys away. Bloodprice emerged from the broken head. He held a section of the Titan's cranial armor above him. Blood poured over his body. The sky answered. Reality split above Darmor. Red light flooded the valley. The clouds became muscle and flame. Brass towers appeared for moments behind the wounded air. A roar came from beyond the world, vast enough to make the wah cry of millions sound like the whimper of prey. Bloodprice's armor cracked. Flesh pushed through ceramite. Horns tore from his helm. His spine lengthened with wet detonations. Wings unfolded from his back, dragging chains and torn muscle through the air. The axe fell from hands that had become claws. Voda Bloodprice rose from the Hierophant's corpse, no longer confined to mortal shape. The World Eaters knelt or screamed. The Orks opened fire at him. The Tyranids turned as one. Zaplug collapsed beside Gorzad. The weird boy's hands clawed at his own face. Green light streamed from his eyes, mixing with the red illumination pouring through the wound in reality. The shadow in the warp pressed down from above. The Wah pushed upward from below. The warp tore sideways through both. Zaplug screamed until his gums bled. Gorzad seized him by the collar. "What do you see?" The weird boy looked through him. 3 hungers. His voice came from somewhere deeper than his throat. "The red one wants skulls. The green one wants war. The black one wants everything." Another psychic shock struck him. Blood burst from the rods in his skull. "They're gods," he gasped. "Gods trying to bite through the same skull." The cornate host moved deeper into Darmor before the sky healed. Berserkers followed the ascending blood price toward the next concentration of life. Demonic shapes walked beside them, half seen through smoke and blood. Orc mobs followed because nothing that large would be permitted to leave without a challenge. The Tyranids did not pursue immediately. Feeder organisms descended upon the valley. Rippers covered the Hierophant's corpse. They entered its wounds, stripped dead berserkers from shattered armor, and ate orcs buried beneath the fallen titan. Larger reclamation beasts dragged corrupted flesh toward digestion pools with the same indifference shown to all other biomass. The swarm consumed its own dead. It consumed the orcs. It consumed the servants of Khorne. Warp-tainted blood, fungal tissue, gene seed organs, Tyranid flesh, and the remains of billions became the same dark slurry. Gorzad watched capillary tendrils drink it from the earth. Every army had killed. Only one had kept the corpses. A damaged Vox unit crackled at his belt. The message came from Octarius, repeated across every surviving Orc channel. A 4-armed tyrant had appeared before the Overfiend's capital. The Tyranid swarms were moving with a single purpose. Zaplug heard the transmission. His bleeding eyes turned toward the distant stars. "That's it," he whispered. Gorzad looked at him. "What?" "The thing behind the bugs." Across the moor, feeder tendrils tightened around the dead. "It's come to fight." Every Tyranid on Octarius turned at the same moment. The change began in the western ash wastes, where a brood of Hormagaunts had spent 9 days throwing themselves against a Goth redoubt. The creatures stopped halfway through their 10th charge. They stood among the smoking corpses of earlier broods, talons planted in the mud, skulls angled towards some command too vast and distant for Orc senses. Then they withdrew. Across the northern mountains, winged organisms abandoned an attack upon the fuel towers of Grimsnag Plateau. In the jungles beneath Gargates, raveners surfaced behind bloodaxe lines, killed no one, and vanished into the earth again. Carnifex broods approaching the fortress roads turned aside before entering artillery range. The change crossed continents. It passed through gaunts, warriors, lictors, burrowing beasts and living engines of war. Billions of organisms altered direction with no shouted command, no signal flare and no hesitation. Entire fronts folded inward. Synapse creatures retreated behind layers of expendable flesh. Spore chimneys stopped venting. Biovores ceased firing. Octarius became quiet. The Orcs hated the quiet. They emerged from trenches and bunkers, firing into the fog. Warbikes raced beyond the gun lines, searching for something to chase. Nobs accused one another of frightening the enemy away. Mechs dismantled loaded weapons because inactivity offended them. Zaplug Headbanger knew better. The weird boy stood upon the roof of a moving scrap fortress, chained to a grounding mast and surrounded by minder grots. Green sparks crawled between the rods driven through his skull. His head twitched toward every horizon, as though invisible claws were turning it. Gorzad Ironjaw watched him from below. "What's it doing?" Zaplug's teeth clicked together. "Thinking. The bugs always think." "No." The weird boy looked down at him. Green light streamed from his eyes and illuminated the blood vessels beneath the skin of his face. "Not like this." A pressure settled across the world. It was not the blind psychic weight that had smothered astropaths and broken human minds since the Tyranids first entered Octarius. This presence had edges, direction, purpose. The shadow in the warp no longer felt like a storm. It felt like a blade. Zaplug pulled against his chains. "Da! Thing behind him is here." The Swarm Lord walked at the center of the invasion. It did not announce itself. It did not roar at the mountains, display trophies, or challenge the Overfiend to single combat. Such gestures belonged to creatures that required witnesses. The Swarm Lord required obedience. Tyrant Guard moved around it in a wall of armor and crushing limbs. Warriors bowed their crested heads as it passed. Gaunts flowed aside without collision, each organism receiving and obeying the same impulse before the command creature reached them. 4 bone sabers rested within its hands. The blades were not forged. They had grown with it, shaped by the Norn Queens and sharpened by the accumulated memory of wars fought beneath other suns. Their edges carried the chemical perfection of a species that learned through consumption. The Swarm Lord looked toward Gargates. The war changed. Orc tactics that had worked for years became useless within a day. The Tyranids did not attack the strongest fortresses. They struck the mechs, repairing the guns behind them. They did not charge the largest mobs. They infested the bridges those mobs required to reach battle. Gargoyles passed over trenches full of firing orcs and descended upon fuel wagons kilometers behind the line. Lictors ignored sleeping boys to kill Vox crews, artillery spotters and drivers. Burrowing organisms collapsed roads beneath ammunition convoys, leaving thousands of armed orcs standing before empty magazines. The first outer fortress fell without its walls being breached. Its guns continued firing until the last shells were spent. The garrison waited for resupply. The ammunition train never arrived. Raveners had opened the road beneath it, swallowing vehicles, grots and cargo into a buried feeding pit. When the Hormagaunts came, the Orcs met them with choppers. They killed the first wave. They killed the second. By the 6th, every blade was trapped beneath layers of bodies. The fortress vanished before dusk. Gorzad's mob received orders to seize Blackfang Ridge. He liked the order because the ridge was occupied by Tyranids and visible from half the western front. Its upper slopes crawled with warriors, venom cannon beasts, and broods of gaunts dug among the rocks. "Straight up," Gorzad told his boys. A blood axe officer pointed toward a route marked across an armor plate. "De Overfiend says we go round the east side, let the tanks hit first, then move when the smoke goes yellow." Gorzad looked at the map. "Straight up's quicker. Straight up's got all the guns." "Yeah." The Goths charged before the tanks moved. Venom cannon fire struck the leading mobs. Living projectiles burst inside orcs and opened them from within. One boy's chest expanded until his ribs tore through his armor. Another clawed at his own throat as parasites chewed upward into his skull. Gorzad climbed over them. His rebuilt shooter hammered against his shoulder. Shells broke gaunts apart and punched chips from warrior armor. Around him, Goths rose through the bombardment in a black tide, roaring whenever the Tyranids killed enough of them to make the climb difficult. The tanks finally fired. Shells struck among orcs and Tyranids alike. The ridge disappeared beneath dust and pulverized chitin. Gorzad reached the summit while the bombardment continued. He killed a warrior by driving his iron jaw through the soft tissue beneath its skull. His boys overran the gun beasts. Tank busters pushed explosives into their weapon cavities. Burner boys flooded the trenches with promethium. The remaining Tyranids withdrew over the far slope. Gorzad stood at the highest point and raised the severed head of the warrior. "Blackfang's ours," The surviving Goths roared. Then the smoke cleared. The ridge overlooked nothing. No road crossed beneath it. No Tyranid spawning ground lay beyond it. No supply route, gun nest, or capillary tower stood within range. The far valley was empty, except for the retreating organisms. A damaged Vox unit crackled on Gorzad's belt. "Gorzad, where are you?" "Blackfang." "You stupid git. They're hitting Ironbelly Fort." The horizon flashed. A column of fire rose where the western ammunition reserves had been stored. Gorzad looked at the useless ridge. The battle had existed only to keep his mob away. The Tyranids had sacrificed thousands to occupy him, while lictors and burrowing organisms destroyed a fortress worth millions. One of his boys scratched at a wound in his neck. "We won, though." Gorzad crushed the warrior's head in his fist. The Swarm Lord continued cutting Octarius apart. Mobs arrived at battlefields after the enemy had withdrawn. Gargants entered valleys where the ground had been hollowed beneath them. Squiggoths charged across bridges that collapsed under their weight. Aircraft found their landing fields burning when they returned to refuel. The Orks still possessed numbers beyond counting. They could not bring those numbers to the same place. The Overfiend ended the confusion with violence. He called every war boss, nob and mech of consequence to Gargates. Those who arrived late were beaten. Those who refused were killed. Those who claimed their own territories mattered more were reminded that without Gargates, there would be no central armories, no mech foundries, and no greatest war in the galaxy. The summons traveled across Octarius. Reserves moved. Gargants marched from distant sieges. Stompers were pulled from workshops before their crews finished attaching limbs. Squiggoth herds crossed mountain passes in columns so vast that their feet reshaped the roads. Battle wagons, gun wagons, trucks, aircraft and infantry converged upon the capital. Orks abandoned fortresses they had defended for years. They came because the Overfiend had called. They came because the Swarm Lord was there. The largest enemy drew the largest Wah. The Overfiend stood upon Gargate's command platform as the armies gathered beneath him. His armor carried new scars. One exhaust stack had been torn away. His power claw opened and closed with the grinding of industrial machinery. "The forearm bug thinks it's clever." Millions of Orks listened. "It keeps running, keeps hiding, keeps nicking all the roads and shells." The Overfiend pointed toward the mountains. "So we're going to take away everywhere it can run." The mechs understood. Scabgob Voltkrumper understood first. He drove drilling rigs into the cliffs surrounding the Swarm Lord's central swarm. He packed mine shafts with promethium, rocket fuel, stolen Imperial demolition charges, and Tyranid venom sacs. Shock attack guns were chained to cliff faces. Force field generators were reversed, so their unstable barriers pressed inward rather than outward. Zaplug was dragged to the center of the Ork line. The weird boy fought his chains. "It sees us." "Good," said Gorzad. "It wants us together." "Even better." Zaplug turned toward him. "No, you're thick." The first Gargant fired. The plan began. Ork armies struck from every direction. They did not attempt subtlety. They drowned the Tyranid positions in bodies, shells, and roaring engines. Stompers entered the valleys while artillery hit the slopes above them. Aircraft filled the sky. Squiggoths pushed through gaunt broods, tusks opening paths for mobs following beneath their bellies. The Swarm Lord ordered withdrawal. The mechs detonated the mountains. Cliffs collapsed behind the swarm. Stone, scrap, and burning fuel buried escape routes beneath millions of tons of rubble. Custom force fields flashed across the remaining gaps. Shock attack guns tore holes through reality, disgorging screaming snotlings inside Tyranid organisms and transport beasts. For the first time since its arrival, the Swarm Lord had nowhere to yield. Zaplug unleashed the Wah. Green lightning crossed the valley. The blast struck clustered warriors and ruptured their synaptic crests. Gaunts faltered. Carnifexes turned without direction. Sections of the swarm lost coordination and fell beneath the Ork advance. The Overfiend charged. The Tyranids closed around their commander. Tyrant Guard met the Orks first. Their armor absorbed rockets, shells and power claw blows. They died standing, each one purchasing seconds with its body. Warriors replaced them, then carnifexes, then gaunts in numbers so dense that the ground disappeared. The Swarm Lord spent them all, not to survive, to reach the Overfiend. Gorzad held the eastern flank. His mob stood between two wrecked stompers, where the valley narrowed. Tyranids came through the gap in layers. Shooters fired until the barrels softened. Choppers broke. Boys fought with stones, teeth, and severed weapon limbs. A tyrant guard entered the breach. It killed 4 orcs with its first strike. Crushing claws closed. Around another and reduced armor, flesh and bone to a wet mass. Gorzad climbed the corpse mound and met it head-on. His chopper broke against its chest. The creature drove a limb through his shoulder. Gorzad seized the arm before it withdrew. He planted both feet against the tyrant guard's armor and pulled until the joint opened. Black blood flooded over him. The beast struck with its other claw. The blow tore away half his shoulder plate and the flesh beneath. Gorzad rammed the severed limb into its throat. His boys swarmed it. They dragged it down beneath blows, blades and boots, until its skull split against the stones. When Gorzad looked up, fewer than a quarter of his mob remained. Beyond them, the Overfiend had reached the Swarm Lord. The command creature moved with speed impossible for its size. 4 bone sabers met the warboss's power claw and axe. Sparks and fragments of living blade flew from each impact. The Overfiend attacked with absolute force. The Swarm Lord deflected, turned, and cut. One blade opened the warboss's side. Another severed an exhaust pipe from his armor. A third struck his iron gob and carved a line across the metal. The Overfiend laughed. He caught the next saber in his claw. The blade cut through 2 mechanical fingers before the power field locked around it. The warboss pulled. The Swarm Lord came with the weapon. The Overfiend drove his forehead into the creature's face. Chitin shattered. The Swarm Lord staggered for the first time. The Orc armies saw it. Their roar shook the valley. The Swarm Lord attacked again. Its sabers became a storm of white edges. They cut through armor, severed cables, and opened wounds faster than the Overfiend's blood could flow. The warboss gave ground. One step, then another. The Tyranid pressed forward. The Overfiend dropped his axe. His free hand closed around the Swarm Lord's upper arm. The power claw seized another. He pulled. One limb tore from the creature's shoulder. The Swarm Lord buried 2 sabers in the warboss's abdomen. The Overfiend stepped closer, forcing the blades through his body until their points erupted from his back. He bit into the Swarm Lord's face. His iron gob crushed its cranial armor. Then the power claw closed around the command creature's torso. The field ignited. Bone cracked. Chitin ruptured. Internal organs burst from the Swarm Lord's mouth and wounds. The Overfiend lifted it above his head and smashed it onto the stones. Once, twice. On the third impact, the Swarm Lord's spine broke. The Overfiend tore the 4-armed tyrant apart before the assembled horde. Octarius screamed its triumph. Weapons fired into the air. Mobs charged the remaining Tyranids without orders. Weirdboy energy turned the clouds green. Gargants sounded their horns until mountains answered. Gorzad watched the Overfiend stand over the broken strategist. For the first time since Orok, the hunger appeared to possess a corpse. The celebration lasted for days. Ammunition was spent firing at nothing. Fuel reserves were burned in races. Rival warbosses resumed their disputes before the Swarm Lord's remains had been divided into trophies. Positions abandoned for the final battle remained empty. Bridges went unguarded. Supply roads filled with drunken mobs and fighting pits. Gorzad received command of 3 additional Goth warbands for holding the eastern breach. His armor was rebuilt. More boys began calling him boss rather than Nob. He watched the Overfiend from a distance and imagined the day when there would be only one larger orc left to kill. Far beyond Octarius, worlds were dying. Leviathan's biofleets had not stopped consuming. Oceans became nutrient slurry. Atmospheres were stripped. Continents collapsed into digestion seas. Every scrap of useful matter rose through capillary towers and entered the waiting ships. Inside one vessel, larger than a city, a Norn chamber contracted. Nutrient fluids churned around a growing form. Bones lengthened, armor hardened. 4 limbs opened within the dark, each gripping a newly grown saber. The creature's eyes opened. It remembered the valley. It remembered the overfiend's teeth. It remembered its own spine breaking against the stones. The Swarm Lord had returned. The convoy entered the Caradon passage with 312 ships. Not one emerged. The route had been used by the Orks for decades. It cut between the gravity wells of 2 dead systems, avoiding the worst of the asteroid storms and shortening the journey from Urmuk to Octaria by several days. Every mech, freebooter, and blockade runner in the Empire knew it. The convoy carried shells, promethium, replacement engines, fresh mobs, and enough food fungus to supply Gargates through another siege cycle. Kill cruisers guarded the flanks. Armed transports filled the center. Rocks moved behind them like drifting fortresses, their gunports crowded with boys eager for the Tyranids to show themselves. Gorzad Ironjaw watched the lead vessels vanish into the passage. The stars ahead appeared undisturbed. No bioships waited upon the auger screens. No spore clouds obscured the route. The weird boy chained to the command deck felt nothing but the ordinary crushing presence of the shadow in the warp. The convoy entered anyway. The first half disappeared from the Vox. There was no warning. One moment, hundreds of Ork voices filled the channels with threats, arguments, and engine reports. The next, every transmission from the leading ships ceased. The rear vessels accelerated. Orks interpreted silence as a challenge. Gorzad stood upon the command platform of the blockade runner Ironmaw and watched the darkness ahead. "Slow down." The helmsman looked back. "What?" "Slow down." The boy stared at him as though Gorzad had ordered the ship to surrender. "We're Orks." "I know. We go faster when there's trouble." Gorzad seized him by the throat and threw him from the controls. "Now we go slower." He pulled the main drive lever back himself. The Ironmaw shuddered as its engines fought the command. Vessels behind it swerved, collided, and fired warning shots. One transport rammed the blockade runner's stern, tore away half its prow, and spun toward a rock. The leading ships reappeared upon the viewing screens. They were not moving. The convoy had entered a wall of dead vessels. Bioships waited beyond them, concealed within the wreckage of earlier kills. Their bodies carried layers of frozen debris and scavenged armor that masked them from crude Ork sensors. Feeder tendrils were already wrapped around the first transports. The dead ships had not transmitted because Tyranid organisms had entered their hulls and killed the Vox crews first. Living projectiles struck the convoy from both flanks. One kill cruiser split open along its engine decks. Fire burst from the wound, carrying boys and machinery into the void. Another vessel attempted to turn and found a bioship waiting behind it. The jaws of the creature closed around the cruiser's stern. Chitin pierced armor. The living ship bit through the engines. Gorzad saw the pattern. The passage had not been blocked. It had been closed behind them. The Swarm Lord had returned. Its first strike was not against a fortress, army, or war boss. It attacked the roads between worlds. Gorzad forced the Ironmaw into a gap between wrecked transports. The ship's armor shrieked as it scraped along both hulls. Tyranid organisms moved across the exterior, claws finding seams in the plates. "Burn 'em off!" The gun boss opened fire. Broadside weapons discharged across the vessel's own hull. Shells and rockets tore away organisms, armor, and several Orks who had climbed outside to fight them. The Ironmaw broke free. 37 vessels followed it. The rest died inside the passage. The renewed Leviathan fleets divided throughout the Octarius system with timing no Ork commander could predict. One tendril surrounded Orok with spore ships and heavy assault organisms. Another closed upon Urmuk's void docks. Smaller fleets moved against Gork's Bonts, Dakazot, and Badsquig, while the greatest concentration remained beyond Octaria, just outside the range of the capital's longest guns. Every war boss believed his world faced the true invasion. Every war boss demanded reinforcements. The Overfiend could not answer them all. Orok died first. The world's Vox traffic reached Octaria in fragments. At the beginning, the messages were boastful. North continent's full of bugs. Good. Need more rockets. Why? Used all ours. On what? Bugs. The transmissions continued through the first day. One fortress claimed to have killed every Tyranid within 300 kilometers. Another claimed the same creatures were attacking its eastern wall. A war boss ordered the execution of a gun crew for retreating, then requested reinforcements because the gun crew no longer existed. By the second day, the boasting changed. Send shells. Which kind? All kind. Got none. Then send boys. Got none spare. Then send anything. The third day brought screaming. The fourth brought only isolated gunfire, heavy breathing, and the grinding sound of something eating near an open Vox pickup. One final transmission reached Gargates. A voice whispered through static. Still fighting. Something struck metal. The voice became a wet gargle. Then Orok vanished from every channel. Urmuk became a slaughterhouse in the void. The planet's orbital docks had been built from wrecked ships, chained together around a central scrap moon. Kill cruisers, armed hulks, and half-finished attack craft launched directly from open construction frames. The Tyranids attacked before most were complete. Bioships closed around the dockyards. Their weapon organisms fired through scaffolds and fuel lines. Ork ships launched without armor, engines or fully attached gun decks, because remaining in port meant being eaten where they hung. The kill cruiser Gork's Knuckle rammed a bioship through the mouth. Its prow passed between rows of teeth and buried itself inside the creature's throat. Boarding hatches opened before either vessel stopped moving. Orks poured directly into the living ship, hacking through membranes and nerve cords. Tyranid organisms crossed in the opposite direction. They moved through vacuum without protection. Claws bit into the cruiser's hull. Smaller creatures huddled beneath larger organisms until they reached an airlock, gunport, or impact breach. The ships became one battlefield. Orks fought inside digestive chambers, while Gaunts hunted through engine decks. Fire spread through the cruiser. Acid spread through the bioship. Both vessels continued firing at surrounding targets with their hulls locked together. Elsewhere, destroyed ships remained fused by boarding claws, feeder tendrils, and ramming prows. Frozen bodies drifted between them. Boys crossed chains and cables to reach the enemy, sometimes fighting for hours upon exposed hulls, with the stars beneath their boots. Urmuk's orbit filled with wreckage until ships could no longer maneuver without colliding with the dead. Gork's Bonts answered the blockade with weapons no sane civilization would have constructed. The Super Rock's big mechs activated lightning towers across its surface. Green-white bolts crossed the void and struck broods descending toward the fortress. Winged organisms became ash. Mycetic spores burst before reaching the armor. A gravity weapon fired from the asteroid's southern hemisphere. The field caught a Tyranid swarm and compressed it into a sphere of flesh scarcely larger than a battle wagon. Chitin, organs, and living weapons became a single pulsing mass. The mechs cheered. Then the weapon reversed. Half the gun crew collapsed inward. Bones snapped, armor folded. Grots, boys, and machinery became a red-green smear across the firing chamber. Replacement crews climbed over them before the field stabilized. A shock battery opened a wound in reality inside a bioship. Snotlings materialized within the creature's organs, insane from their journey through the warp. They chewed, clawed, and detonated the bombs strapped to their bodies. The bioship died. The battery exploded on its next shot and teleported an entire mech workshop into deep space. The fortress crews classified both results as victories. Blood Axe commandos struck the Tyranid fleet from within. They entered captured feeder vessels through digestive vents, coating their armor in black ichor and pulped organs to conceal their scent. They moved through muscular corridors without speaking, using hand signals copied from Imperial soldiers and improved through the addition of more knives. When a passage contracted around them, they froze. When feeder organisms moved past, they lay among half-digested corpses. The commandos planted explosives beside synaptic nerve clusters and propulsion organs. Several returned carrying bioweapons, teeth, and the heads of creatures that had never possessed recognizable heads. Others never returned. One commando mob destroyed a vessel large enough to swallow a city. The explosion killed thousands of Tyranids and hundreds of Orks fighting nearby. The larger fleet did not change course. Dakazot responded differently. Its speed freaks turned the subterranean war into a race. The planet's tunnels were broad enough for columns of bikes and buggies. Tyranid broods moved beneath the surface, collapsing routes and attacking from hidden chambers. The speed freaks began carrying demolition charges instead of avoiding them. Bikes roared through the passages at lethal speed. Riders threw explosives into support columns as they passed. Cave-ins buried Raveners, Gaunts and Orks, too slow to keep ahead of the collapse. The first rider to escape received teeth. The rider with the most Tyranid bodies attached to his vehicle received more. One buggy reached the finish, dragging 17 Gaunts behind it, all still alive and attempting to climb aboard. The driver was declared champion moments before they tore him apart. Gorzad carried ammunition between the dying worlds. The Iron Maw became the fastest surviving blockade runner in the Empire because every slower vessel had already been destroyed. Scabgob had reinforced its prow with Tyranid armor, added engines taken from 3 wrecks, and installed a stolen force field generator that worked whenever struck with a large enough hammer. The hold carried shells for Orruk until Orruk fell. It carried fuel to Urmuk until the dockyards became unreachable. It carried replacement guns to Gork's Bonts and returned with wounded boys, captured organisms, and more damage than armor. Every voyage cost ships. The first convoy under Gorzad's command contained 64 vessels. 41 reached their destination. The next began with 40. 20 survived. By the 4th journey, only 9 captains were willing to follow him. 2 deserted before departure. 1 fired upon the others and attempted to steal their fuel. Gorzad killed the captain and took the ship. He learned the Swarm Lord's net by flying through it. Bioships did not chase every vessel. They attacked those carrying fuel, ammunition, and mechs. Feeder organisms ignored empty hulks. Lictors boarded command ships. Spore clouds were positioned where damaged Ork vessels would naturally retreat. The enemy remembered. It knew how Orks reacted to apparent weakness. It left targets unguarded and waited for the largest mobs to gather around them. A Tyranid fleet withdrew from Urmuk, allowing Ork ships to claim a void station they had lost days earlier. Every available cruiser moved to defend the prize. The Tyranids struck the unprotected construction docks behind them. On Dakazot, broods abandoned a tunnel complex filled with fuel reserves. Speed freaks raced to seize it. The tunnels collapsed around them. At Gork's Bonts, the mechs destroyed 3 bioships in a single lightning barrage. The victory drew reserve power from the asteroid's southern guns. The Swarm Lord attacked the southern hemisphere. Gorzad recognized the shape of it. It was Blackfang Ridge again. A target offered, a victory permitted, something greater destroyed elsewhere. He brought the warning to 3 war bosses aboard the Urmuk command hulk. The first wore armor made from ship plating and called himself Admiral Kilgob, despite having never commanded anything smaller than a cruiser. The second had replaced both legs with tracked machinery. The third spent most of the council attempting to remove a parasite from his ear with a knife. Gorzad slammed an armor map onto the table. "The bugs letting us win." Kilgob laughed. "Bugs don't let Orks win. This one does. We killed it. It came back. Then we'll kill it again." Gorzad pointed toward the marked routes. "Every time we take something, it eats something bigger." The tracked war boss leaned over the map. So we stop taking stuff? Gorzad hesitated. The suggestion felt physically wrong. No, we take the right stuff. The third war boss pulled the knife from his ear. A small Tyranid organism wriggled on the blade. Sounds like blood axe talk. Gorzad shot him. The surviving war bosses agreed with his plan immediately. It did not matter. Before the Orks could concentrate their remaining mobile forces, a new message arrived from Badsquig. The planet belonged to hunters. Beast snaggers covered its plains. Squig herds filled the valleys. Squiggoths and squigosaurs roamed beneath banners carrying the glyph of Warboss Gragnat's Stompkrumper. Stompkrumper had gathered his tribes to face the newest Tyranid landings. He stood upon a fortress wall built from the skulls of giant beasts, bionic eyes scanning the distant plain. One arm and one leg were mechanical, crude replacements for the limbs he had lost, attempting to tame a carnifex. The ground beyond his armies trembled. Something enormous emerged through the smoke. Its armor was fluorescent blue, not the dark violet and black of the lesser swarms, but a brilliant color visible across kilometers of battlefield. Yellow eyes burned beneath ridges of chitin. Fangs as tall as orcs protruded from its mouth. Its claws could have opened a gargant from throat to engine. Darblu 1 looked toward the beast snagger lines. Every gun fell silent. Every hunter saw the same trophy. The Bio-Titan did not charge. It stood beyond the range of the largest guns and allowed itself to be seen. Its yellow eyes fixed upon Gragnat's Stompkrumper. Then it turned. It withdrew into the smoke with slow, deliberate steps. The silence broke. Every orc on Badsquig began shouting at once. Stompkrumper claimed the kill. His nobs claimed the right to accompany him. Rival war bosses claimed the beast had looked at them instead. Hunters fought over who had seen it first. Squig riders mounted before receiving orders. Mechs began building traps without knowing where the creature had gone. Across the system, the Swarm Lord tightened its net. On Badsquig, Pride stepped willingly inside it. Gragnat's Stompkrumper declared the hunt from the roof of a fortress built from the skulls of monsters. The skulls belonged to Squiggoths, Carnifexes, Hive Tyrants, and beasts without names that had crawled from Badsquig's poisoned jungles before the Tyranids came. Iron bars had been driven through their jaws. Gun platforms occupied the larger eye sockets. Grots crawled across the bonework, carrying ammunition, banners, and buckets of red paint. Below, billions of orcs filled the plains. Beast snaggers crowded around herds of squigosaurs, plated in scars and scavenged armor. Mounted hunters rode snarling squigs, whose mouths were large enough to swallow grots whole. Trappers dragged cages, hooks, chain nets, and explosives behind them. Rival war bosses arrived beneath their own banners, each convinced that the greatest kill on Badsquig belonged to him. The Wah field thickened with their anticipation. Stompkrumper raised his mechanical arm. The crude bionic ended in a three-fingered claw built from mining machinery. Pistons hissed along the elbow. Exposed cables ran into metal sockets hammered directly through the war boss's shoulder. His other hand held an axe made from a squiggoth jaw. "Today," he roared, "we starts dar time of dar big kill." The planes answered. Weapons fired into the sky. Squig herds stampeded through lesser mobs. A weird boy burst into green flame and teleported 300 beast snaggers into a nearby cliff. The survivors dug themselves out and cheered because they had reached higher ground first. Stompkrumper pointed toward the distant smoke where the fluorescent blue titan had disappeared. "Dat big blue beast is mine." Several rival war bosses shouted disagreement. Stompkrumper's bionic eye glowed red. He fired the cannon mounted beneath his mechanical forearm. One challenger vanished from the waist upward. Another lost his head. The remaining war bosses decided the declaration had been sufficiently debated. "Find it," Stompkrumper ordered. "Chase it. Trap it. Bring me every bit except a head." He struck the fortress roof with his axe. "The head goes on me wall." The planetary hunt began. Gorzad Ironjaw reached Badsquig 3 days later aboard the Iron Maw. The blockade runner entered the atmosphere with one engine burning, half its gun decks exposed, and Tyranid organisms frozen across the outer hull. Only 4 ships remained from the ammunition convoy that had left Octaria. The rest had been eaten between the worlds. Gorzad stood in the open assault bay as the vessel descended over the beast snagger camps. Endless herds moved below. Squigosaurs trampled fungal forests. Trucks and battle wagons raced beside them, their crews firing at isolated Tyranids, rival hunters and shadows that looked suspiciously alive. The Iron Maw landed hard enough to tear open a fuel line. Scabgob's force field generator activated on impact and hurled half the escaping Promethium back into the ship. The resulting fire killed 6 grots and improved the engine noise. Gorzad led his surviving boys down the ramp. They carried ammunition, orders from the Overfiend, and the warning no war boss wanted to hear. Octarius was being isolated. Orok was dead. Urmuk's void docks were collapsing. The super rock of Gork's Bonce fought alone. Stompcrumper listened from a throne made from a Carnifex's ribcage. The war boss's bionic leg rested upon a pile of Tyranid skulls. One eye was natural. The other was a collection of lenses welded into a metal socket. The mechanical arm hung at his side, large enough to crush a knob without closing completely. Gorzad slapped the Overfiend's glyph-marked plate onto the table between them. Gargates wants every mob ready to return. Stompcrumper stared at the plate. Why? 'Cause the big 4-arm bug's cutting up the whole system. I heard it got killed. It came back. Kill it again. Gorzad leaned forward. That's the plan. Needs boys. Stompcrumper pointed through the open fortress wall toward the distant plains. My boys is hunting. Den stop 'em. The entire chamber went quiet. Stompcrumper rose. He was larger than Gorzad, though not by enough to make the difference comfortable. His mechanical leg struck the floor with the weight of an artillery shell. You telling me to stop the big kill? I'm telling you the Overfiend says Octarius comes first. Stompcrumper's natural eye narrowed. Killing the blue one comes first. It's one beast. It's the biggest beast. That don't make it the most important. The bionic arm closed around the edge of the table and crushed it. Stompcrumper stepped close enough for Gorzad to smell oil, blood and fungus beer on his breath. When I kill it, every beast snagger in Octarius knows I'm the biggest boss. War gets bigger. Bugs get scared. We win. Bugs don't get scared. Stompcrumper grinned. Then they're stupid. His confidence had been forged by the beast that took his flesh. Years before, Stompcrumper had attempted to tame a Carnifex. He had not wounded it first. He considered that cheating. The creature had been trapped between 2 cliff faces after destroying a snakebite camp. Stompcrumper entered the gorge carrying a chain, a shock prod, and a saddle large enough for a battle wagon. The Carnifex removed his left arm with its first blow. It took his right eye with the second. He fastened the chain around its neck, using his teeth. The beast tore away his leg, dragged him through the gorge, and crushed 17 boys before the surviving hunters stunned it with enough rockets to bring down a bunker. When Stompcrumper woke, Doc Grotsnipper had replaced the missing parts with machinery and wired the pain receptors backward. The Carnifex had died while being fitted for its saddle. Stompcrumper considered the attempt successful because the creature had almost been worth keeping. Dar Blue 1 would be better. At first, Badsquig seemed to prove him right. The beast snaggers tore through the Tyranid landings. Squigosaurs crushed gaunts beneath clawed feet and bit warriors in half. Mounted hunters drove spears into synapse beasts, hooked the bodies, and dragged them behind their mounts. Beast-hide armor turned aside flesh borers that would have burrowed through thinner plate. The Orks fought at close range, where they believed all truths became obvious. A creature was strong, or it was weak. A hunter lived, or he died. The largest beast belonged to whoever struck the killing blow. Stompcrumper's mobs killed entire broods before they could form proper attack lines. They burned spawning pits, dragged Carnifex corpses back to the camps, and painted kill glyphs across the fortress walls. The stories spread. Natural orc toughness had defeated Tyranid adaptation. Squig flesh resisted alien toxins. Beast snaggers understood monsters better than the hive mind did. Every claim became louder with each repetition. Then the new organisms appeared. The first toxins did not kill the squigosaurs. They entered their nervous systems. The beasts convulsed beneath their riders, jaws snapping without direction. Some collapsed. Others turned upon the nearest movement. One squigosaur tore through its own hunting mob, swallowed a knob, and continued running until its heart burst. Smaller. Tyranids stopped attacking the thickest armor. They swarmed the eyes. They entered mouths, ears, and wounds. They chewed through the softer tissue beneath joints and reached the nerves controlling limbs. Squigosaurs remained alive while their bodies stopped obeying them. Larger bioforms refused direct combat. Carnifexes withdrew before the mounted charges. Warriors vanished into ravines. Gaunts drew hunters across mined ground and into the range of hidden biovores. The kill piles shrank. Stompcrumper's temper grew. Every failed hunt made the rival war bosses louder. They whispered that Dar Blue One had chosen not to fight him. Some claimed the beast had looked away because Stompcrumper was too small to notice. Then the Titan returned. It appeared beyond the burned forest at dusk. Its blue armor glowed through the smoke. Yellow eyes watched the hunting columns. Each fang was taller than an orc. The claws beneath its forelimbs could have ripped the fortress at Skulldacker Ridge apart one tower at a time. The beast snaggers charged. Dar Blue One killed the leading squigosaurs with a single sweep of its limb. Bodies, riders, and armor flew into the forest. Its weapon organisms discharged into the following mobs, boiling flesh from bone and spreading acidic vapor through the trees. Stompcrumper arrived after it withdrew. He found the dead, but no trail. 2 days later, Dar Blue One appeared at the edge of the Bone Plains. It destroyed one hunting party and left another untouched. Stompcrumper pursued. The Titan vanished into a spore storm. It appeared again beyond a ruined mech fort, close enough for the war boss to see old shell scars across its blue carapace. Stompcrumper fired his arm cannon. The shot struck its shoulder. Dar Blue One turned toward him. For one breath, hunter and prey stared across the wasteland. Then the Titan withdrew. Stompcrumper roared until his iron throat bled. He began building traps. The first used grots. Thousands were chained inside a ravine with sirens, fuel drums, and slabs of raw meat. The belief was that Dar Blue One would hear the screaming, smell the bait, and enter the mined gorge. Lesser Tyranids came instead. The mines killed the grots. The swarms killed the trap crews. Dar Blue One appeared upon a distant ridge and watched. The second trap used beast snaggers as bait. Mobs were ordered into a canyon, while artillery crews waited above. The Orks killed several Tyranid broods before realizing the artillery had been destroyed during the night. None escaped the canyon. The third trap used riderless squigosaurs, fitted with explosive collars. The beasts were driven toward a sighting of Dar Blue One and vanished into the fungal jungles. The explosions came from every direction except the one Stompcrumper expected. Each failure sharpened his obsession. Each corpse became proof that the trophy must be worth the cost. Gorzad saw what the war boss refused to see. The Titan appeared where the Orks were strongest. It withdrew toward places where they could not support one another. It killed enough hunters to preserve its legend, but never enough to end the hunt. Gorzad entered Stompcrumper's command chamber for the final time. "The thing wants you to chase it." Stompcrumper sat sharpening the Squiggoth jaw axe. "Everything wants me to chase it." "No, it's showing itself. 'Cause it knows I'm coming. It knows you'll come." The axe stopped moving. Gorzad pointed toward a map covered in kill marks and failed traps. "Every time it shows, you move more boys away from the fortresses. Every time it runs, you follow further." Stompcrumper rose. "You scared?" "No." "Jealous?" Gorzad bared his iron teeth. "No. Den why ain't you hunting?" "'Cause I don't like being pulled around by some bug." Stomp Crumper struck him. The mechanical arm hit like a wrecking ball. Gorzad crossed the chamber, smashed through a bone pillar, and landed among trophy skulls. His boys raised their weapons. Hundreds of beast snaggers aimed back. Gorzad pulled himself upright. Half the armor across his chest hung loose. Blood ran between the plates of his jaw. He laughed. Stomp Crumper pointed toward the doors. "Get off my world." Gorzad spat a broken tooth onto the floor. "When it eats you, I'm taking that axe." Stomp Crumper's bionic eye flared. "Run before I use it." Gorzad left with his reinforcement. Mob. That exile saved them. The Blue One appeared the next morning. It stood in the center of the Dead Moon Basin, a lakebed so deep its rim rose like a ring of mountains. Cracked mud covered the floor. The slopes were bare, offering no cover for anything larger than a grot. The Titan waited in the open. Stomp Crumper saw perfection. Every hunter on Badsquig saw the same. The war boss gathered everything. Billions of orcs moved toward the basin. Squigosaurs descended the slopes in herds. Beast snagger mobs followed with spears, chains, and guns. Battle wagons crowded the upper rim. Rival war bosses abandoned their fortresses rather than allow Stomp Crumper to claim the beast alone. Gorzad watched from a distant ridge beside the Iron Moor. Zaplug Headbanger trembled against the ship's armor. Too quiet. The weird boy's voice was scarcely audible. The basin contained no lesser Tyranids, no gaunts, no warriors, no winged broods, only Dar Blue One. Stomp Crumper led the charge. His mechanical leg drove him ahead of the other war bosses. Squigosaurs thundered around him. The ground shook beneath billions of feet. Dar Blue One turned. It began walking away. The orcs roared and followed. The slopes behind them erupted. Tyranids had been buried beneath the entire rim. Gaunts poured from concealed tunnels. Warriors rose among the artillery positions. Raveners burst beneath battle wagons and overturned them into the basin. Winged organisms descended from the clouds in black swarms, sealing the sky. The exits vanished. Stomp Crumper did not turn back. He saw only the Titan. The beast snagger armies struck the hidden swarm. Squigosaurs disappeared beneath carpets of smaller organisms. Gaunts entered their eyes and mouths. Toxins paralyzed limbs, while warriors opened their bellies. The great beasts collapsed upon their riders, crushing mobs beneath tons of dying muscle. The basin became a digestion pit before the battle ended. Stomp Crumper reached Dar Blue One's shadow. He fired his arm cannon until the mechanism melted. Shells burst against the blue carapace. One tore a shallow wound above the Titan's leg. The war boss charged with his axe raised. Dar Blue One stepped backward. A dozen carnifexes emerged between them. Stomp Crumper hit the first hard enough to split its skull. The second tore away his bionic arm. The third knocked him beneath the feet of the following broods. He rose without the limb. A warrior drove a bone sword through his abdomen. Stomp Crumper pulled himself along the blade and crushed its head with his remaining hand. He continued toward Dar Blue One. He never reached it. Tyranids buried him beneath their bodies. Claws opened his back. Rippers entered the wound. A carnifex closed its jaws around his torso and tore him in half. The upper portion of Gragnat's Stomp Crumper remained alive in the mud. He dragged himself forward with one arm, leaving loops of intestine behind him. Dar Blue One watched. Then it turned away. Gorzad saw the fluorescent armor disappear through the closing swarm. It had not been prey, it had been a command. The last beast snagger banners vanished beneath the Tyranids. Guns fell silent across the basin. The lakebed filled with feeding organisms, dying squigosaurs, and the remains of billions who had mistaken obedience to their nature for freedom. Gorzad entered the Iron Moor. "Lift off." The pilot stared at the basin. "Boss, there's still boys down there." "No." Gorzad watched the swarm close over the last moving shapes. "There's meat." The blockade runner climbed beneath fire. 2 surviving orc ships followed. Gargoyles struck the hull. One engine died. Scabgob's force field flickered, failed and returned after a grot hit the generator with a hammer. Badsquig burned below them. Gorzad carried no captured weapon, no trophy, and no severed head. He carried knowledge. The Swarm Lord did not need to command Orks. It did not need to break their minds, poison their loyalty, or imitate their voices. It had only needed to show them the largest thing they had ever wanted to kill. Then it had walked away. The Genestealers inside Gork's Bonts had waited for years. They slept inside sealed ammunition vaults, where no Ork remembered storing them. They clung to the ceilings of reactor chambers, folded between coolant pipes and devotional glyphs hammered into the machinery by mechs who believed the symbols improved voltage. They hid behind ventilation grills, inside abandoned crew compartments, and beneath the iron floors of fungus breweries. Some had been carried aboard as trophies. Others had entered through wounds in the Super Rock's armor. A few had grown within chambers, whose owners disappeared so gradually that no one noticed the emptiness. The Orks believed the fortress belonged to them. Then one command passed through the shadow in the warp. Tens of thousands of eyes opened. The first ammunition vault died without warning. A grot entered carrying a lantern and a loading manifest he could not read. Something unfolded above him. 4 claws closed around his body, and the sound of his death disappeared beneath the roar of the fortress guns. The Genestealers spread. They did not charge toward the nearest noise. They moved through routes learned over years of hiding, striking power relays, atmosphere pumps, and weapon magazines. Broods separated with perfect purpose. Some killed, some sabotaged. Others waited beside escape corridors for the defenders they knew would come. The alarms began in different sections of the Super Rock at once. Claw things into shell room. Deck 12 ain't got no air. Reactor shrine's gone quiet. Who turned off the lights? The answer came as claws through metal. Genestealers burst from the walls of a gun deck while crews loaded the fortress batteries. One landed among the shell handlers and cut 3 Orks apart before its feet touched the floor. Its upper claws removed heads and arms. Its lower limbs opened bellies, spilling green organs across the loading rails. The gun continued firing. Its breech recoiled through the corpses, pulping them against the rear bulkhead. Surviving boys seized tools, shell casings, and severed limbs. They fought in the darkness, while the fortress shook around them. Blood Axe commandos answered the alarms. They emerged from hidden barracks and maintenance tunnels, carrying burners, suppressed shooters, and knives blackened with soot. Their knob wore a stolen Imperial officer's cap and had painted camouflage lines across his face in colors not found anywhere inside the asteroid. "Quiet," he hissed. A Genestealer dropped from the ceiling. The commandos opened fire. The passage became flame. Promethium washed over the creature and clung to its carapace. It struck the floor burning, rose and cut one commando in half. The others surrounded it, firing until the body collapsed beneath a heap of spent brass and burning flesh. The knob kicked the corpse. Sneaky git. The wall behind him opened. The brood came through. The commandos retreated by routes known only to them. Every route led to another ambush. Genestealers waited inside ventilation shafts, beneath floor plates, and behind blast doors that should have been sealed. The hidden warriors realized too late that the infestation had learned their secrets while sleeping inside the same fortress. The fight spread compartment by compartment. Burner boys flooded corridors with fire. Looters fired through bulkheads rather than waiting for doors to open. Mechs welded barricades across passages, trapping Orks and Genestealers together on whichever side appeared less valuable. Broods reached the life support chambers. Claws severed conduits. Atmosphere pumps died. Pressure doors slammed shut across the Super Rock, cutting mobs away from one another. In sections where the doors failed, the air began screaming toward ruptures in the outer armor. A Genestealer tore open an observation port. The reinforced glass bowed outward. Then it shattered. Orks, grots, loose ammunition and alien bodies were dragged into the void. Boys caught chains, railings, and one another. A knob clung to the edge with one hand, while a genestealer fastened claws into his back. He laughed into the escaping air. Then both vanished outside. Frozen bodies gathered around Gork's bonds. Some continued struggling after atmosphere left their lungs, Ork physiology refusing death for precious seconds, while Tyranid claws tore at them beneath the stars. Inside the fortress, the gravity weapon waited. It occupied a chamber large enough to contain a town. Coils surrounded a central barrel pointed through the asteroid's southern face. Suspensor engines hummed beneath platforms crowded with mechs, cables, and terrified grots. Big mech Scabgob Voltkrumper stood at the primary controls. Gorzad had left him aboard the Super Rock during the last ammunition run. The gravity weapon had stopped working, and Scabgob had declared every other mech too stupid to threaten it properly. Now the chamber doors shook beneath genestealer claws. A mech stared at the warning lights. "Field ain't ready." Scabgob struck the panel with a spanner. "Is now. It says overload. Means it's full. Full of what? Gravity." The doors split. Genestealer claws appeared through the gap. Scabgob pulled the firing lever. The chamber bent. The first brood entered at a sprint and collapsed into the floor as though struck by a mountain. Their limbs folded beneath them. Carapaces burst. Black blood spread outward, then flattened into a glistening stain no thicker than paint. The gravity wave traveled through the surrounding decks. Corridors twisted. Armor plates bowed inward. Orks were lifted from their feet and hurled against walls hard enough to leave their bodies embedded in the metal. Genestealers clinging to ceilings were crushed upward until their skulls ruptured. The weapon's coils glowed. One exploded. Shards of machinery crossed the chamber and removed half the secondary crew. Grots became red vapor. A mech's head struck the control platform, remained attached by wires, and continued blinking for several moments. Scabgob laughed. "See? Working." More warning glyphs ignited. The field began pulling at the asteroid itself. Stone cracked beyond the chamber walls. Gun towers tilted across the surface. Whole districts of Gork's bonds shifted toward the weapon, their foundations grinding through rock. The Vox unit beside Scabgob connected with the iron maw. Gorzad's face appeared through static. "Scabgob. Busy. Bonds is breaking. I know. Get out." Scabgob looked around the chamber. The main doors collapsed inward. A wall of genestealers climbed across the wreckage. Behind them, deeper within the super rock, thousands more were moving toward the weapon. Scabgob turned the field regulator beyond its final mark. The machine began screaming. "Can't." Gorzad's image flickered. "Why not? Someone's got to make it big." "How big?" Scabgob looked at the overloaded coils, the splitting walls, and the genestealers entering the chamber. "Big enough you'll see it from Octarius." He cut the Vox. The big mech drew a custom pistol from his belt and fired into the brood. Each shot produced a different effect. One genestealer exploded, another froze, a third vanished and reappeared halfway inside the floor. Scabgob pulled the gravity lever with both hands. Gork's bonds folded. The southern hemisphere collapsed toward the weapon. Gun batteries, armor districts, and fortress halls compressed into a shrinking mass of stone and metal. The northern side tore away under the opposing force. For an instant, the super rock resembled a colossal jaw biting through itself. Then the weapon detonated. The asteroid broke apart. The explosion consumed Scabgob, the genestealer infestation, and millions of Orks still fighting through the fortress. Chunks of Gork's bonds crossed the void, trailing fire. Several struck Tyranid vessels. One fragment tore through a bioship from flank to flank and carried its ruptured organs onward. From the bridge of the Iron Maw, Gorzad watched the light bloom above the stars. Scabgob had been right. It was visible from Octarius. The Tyranids survived it. Feeder vessels moved among the fragments. Organisms landed upon wreckage, where gravity still held atmosphere inside sealed chambers. They tore open the metal and reclaimed whatever remained alive. The Swarm Lord had traded hidden broods for a weapon capable of crushing fleets. It accepted the exchange. Dakazot fell next. Winged organisms descended into its tunnel mouths, carrying sacks of burning biological filament. They spread the strands across the racing routes, where the material clung to stone, vehicles, and flesh. Speed freaks drove into it at full velocity. The nets tightened around bikes and buggies. Heat ignited fuel tanks. Riders became burning shapes trapped within their machines. Those who escaped found the tunnels collapsing behind them. Tyranid organisms had eaten through support columns throughout the underground world. Cave-ins divided the speed freak armies into isolated chambers. Engines roared in the dark. Bikes raced in circles, searching for exits while gaunts closed from side passages, too narrow for vehicles. The last transmissions from Dakazot were not pleas for aid. They were arguments over who had completed the fastest lap before the swarms reached them. Urmuk died from within its shipyards. Lamprey-like organisms struck the orbital structures in clusters. They fastened circular mouths against armor and bored through the metal with rings of grinding teeth. Their bodies swelled as they entered, forcing passages wide enough for the broods carried inside them. Construction chambers erupted. Gaunts poured among mech crews before alarms sounded. Warriors emerged beneath unfinished gun decks. Genostealers cut suspension cables and dropped half-built vessels onto the workers below. One cruiser launched without a prow. Another possessed engines but no controls. A third left the dock with its armor open and Tyranids already fighting through its lower decks. The crew fired every weapon at the shipyard, reasoning that anything still inside had probably been stolen by bugs. Urmuk's orbit became a storm of scrap and living ships. The Overfiend ordered the final Void counterattack. Every vessel still capable of thrust answered. Kill cruisers came from Octaria. Junker fleets emerged from hidden moons. Armed hulks moved under engines welded into their flanks. Rocks lit furnace drives and joined the charge. Unfinished ships launched from Urmuk, with grots clinging to exposed frames. Gorzad's blockade runners formed the spearhead. The Iron Maw carried few shells and less fuel. Patches covered its hull. One gun deck remained open to vacuum, its crew wearing stolen void suits and magnetic boots. Ahead, the Tyranid fleet waited. The Orks attacked. Cruisers rammed bioships. Rocks fired until their gun ports melted. Boarding torpedoes crossed the darkness in swarms, carrying mobs into living hulls, where weapons could no longer distinguish ship from enemy. For a time, the Tyranids gave ground. The Orks pursued. Lesser bioships moved into their path and died beneath concentrated fire. Their bodies broke apart, filling the void with frozen flesh and drifting organisms. The Ork formation narrowed to pass through the wreckage. The larger Tyranid vessels closed from above and below. Living projectiles struck engines first. Feeder tendrils wrapped around transports. Spore clouds entered open decks and began birthing creatures inside the ships. The Ork fleet fought until it no longer possessed a formation. Vessels rammed targets chosen by proximity. Captains fired through friendly ships to reach bioforms behind them. Wreckage multiplied until every surviving ship was trapped among the dead. The Tyranids established control of the void, not by preserving their fleet, but by spending enough of it to bury the Orks. Gorzad escaped with 7 blockade runners. 3 reached Octaria. The Iron Maw descended through a sky filled with burning wreckage. Half its surviving crew died during landing when the rear engines failed, and the ship carved a trench through the outskirts of Gargates. Gorzad walked from the wreck, carrying the Overfiend's orders, reports from dying worlds, and no trophies. His surviving boys followed in silence. Gargates was preparing for the end. Ammunition trains crowded every road. Gargants stood among the mountain guns. Squiggoths filled the valleys beneath armor, towers and crews. Mobs from abandoned fortresses gathered under banners darkened by soot. The Overfiend received Gorzad upon the highest platform. "Orok's gone," Gorzad said. "Gork's Bont's too. Dakazot's trapped. Urmuk ain't building nothing. The Overfiend looked toward the sky. Plenty left here. Could move the fleet. Get out before they close every route. The platform became quiet. The Overfiend turned. Run? Find more boys. Come back bigger. Run. Gorzad did not answer. The Overfiend's claw opened. If Octarius gets eaten while I'm somewhere else, then the bug's bigger than me. He pointed toward the mountains. It ain't. No orc disputed him. Above Gargates, the final air war began. Gargoyles descended in clouds dense enough to hide the sun. Harpies and larger winged organisms followed. Fighter bombers climbed to meet them. Defcoptus launched from towers, roads, and the backs of moving gargants. Stormboys ignited rocket packs and became streaks of black smoke. The first collision covered the sky in fire. Aircraft rammed living creatures. Gargoyles fastened onto wings and tore pilots from cockpits. Stormboys leapt between bioforms, hacking with choppers until gravity claimed them. The orcs killed uncounted swarms. More arrived. Tyranid formations rotated with perfect timing. Fresh broods replaced exhausted ones. Winged beasts attacked fuel stores, landing fields and ammunition lifts instead of chasing every aircraft. Defcoptus returned to empty tanks. Fighter bombers landed upon runways filled with genostealers. Vanguard organisms had already entered behind the lines. Lictors appeared inside gun towers. Raveners erupted beneath artillery tractors. Genostealers opened gates that no external assault had breached. The main fleet cleared landing corridors. The mycetic spores began to fall. They came so densely that the sky resembled a planetary bombardment. Black shapes struck mountains, fortresses, roads, and armies. Each impact sent stone and bodies into the air. Each shattered pod opened and released another swarm. Billions descended. Gorzad stood beneath the western mountain guns, with Doc Riptooth and Zaplug. Riptooth carried a saw in one hand and a slugger in the other. His apron was stiff with old blood. Crates of spare limbs and organs waited behind him. Zaplug shook against his chains. Green fire ran from his eyes. The copper rods in his skull vibrated as the shadow in the warp pressed down upon the War. The surface of Octarius trembled. Capillary towers rose in the distance. Tyranid swarms filled every pass. Biotitans emerged through the smoke, while Gargants turned their guns toward them. Gorzad watched the world disappear beneath enemies. "Can we kill 'em?" Zaplug's jaw worked soundlessly. Gorzad seized his collar. "Can we?" The weird boy stared towards something no other orc could see. "It ain't trying to win now." Another wave of spores struck beyond Gargates. The shock knocked boys from their feet. Zaplug began to weep green light. "It's getting ready to eat the memory of us." Octaria opened its mountains. Rock faces split from summit to root. Iron doors the size of hive districts rolled apart behind avalanches of stone, revealing metal jaws buried within the ranges. Buzzsaws screamed awake along their edges, each serrated wheel broad enough to cut a battle wagon in half. Pistons drove the jaws together as Tyranid swarms filled the passes. The mountains bit down. Millions of organisms vanished between steel and stone. Gaunts became sprays of black blood. Warriors shattered inside their armor. Carnifexes disappeared beneath descending walls of metal, their death throes shaking entire fortresses. The orcs roared approval. Moving scrap cities changed shape around megascrap. Towers rotated upon grinding bases. Streets narrowed into channels overlooked by gun platforms. Buildings folded inward, trapping Tyranid broods inside courtyards where burner boys flooded them with promethium. Magnetic cranes rose above the city. Their generators howled. Invisible force seized armored organisms from the ground and dragged them upward. Gaunts spun helplessly through the air. Warriors clawed at nothing. A carnifex rose high enough to clear the walls, limbs thrashing, before the magnet cut loose and dropped it into an industrial furnace. The creature struck the molten metal alive. Its armor glowed. Its body sank. The furnace closed over it.
Gorzad Ironjaw stood beneath the western guns and laughed until his chest wound reopened. "This," he shouted, "is how you kill a world eater." The mountain artillery fired. Cannon batteries, looted macro weapons, rocket towers and lightning guns discharged together. The air became a solid wall of noise. Shells crossed the plains in densities too great for individual trajectories to remain visible. Tyranid broods vanished beneath explosions. Bio-titans staggered as energy beams stripped armor from their bodies. One vast creature reached the eastern crushing fields. The mechanisms activated beneath it. Steel plates rose around its legs. Chain-driven hooks locked into its carapace. Hydraulic presses closed from 4 directions, rupturing its thorax and forcing organs through the cracks between armor plates. The beast's upper body continued firing. Bioplasma struck the control towers. Ork crews burned inside the machinery. The presses continued closing until the
Bio-Titan folded into itself. Megascrap shook beneath the cheering. The Orks killed more Tyranids in the first hours than some Imperial crusades destroyed in years. It made no difference. Beyond the guns, the horizon remained alive. For every brood reduced to ash, another advanced over it. For every Bio-Titan crushed in the mountain mechanisms, more emerged through the spore clouds. Landing waves disappeared inside artillery storms, only to be replaced by organisms birthed from feeding zones already established across the world. Capillary towers drank Octaria. The dead were dissolved. The soil was stripped. The oceans darkened as reclamation organisms processed their contents. The Swarm Lord did not measure the battle by casualties. It measured distance. Its inner mega-swarm closed around Megascrap from every direction. Gaunts filled the streets. Warriors pressed through breaches. Carnifexes attacked the gates. Bio-Titans advanced behind them, using walls of lesser organisms to absorb the first volleys. The outer megaswarm surrounded the first. It faced away from the capital. Every reinforcement column encountered it. Warbands marching from distant fortresses struck the outer ring and died without reaching Megascrap. Blockade runners descending through the atmosphere found winged broods waiting above the landing grounds. Gargants approaching from the northern foundries disappeared beneath Bio-Titans and burrowing swarms. No one escaped. No one entered. The Overfiend had been placed inside a fortress made from enemies. The Orks did not recognize the design until the guns began to fail. Bodies buried the lower firing pits. Artillery shells struck corpse mounds instead of living targets. Hormagaunts climbed over heaps of their own dead until they reached the barrels and entered the mechanisms. Gargants became trapped. One war engine advanced into the inner swarm until broken organisms reached its knees. Its feet could no longer lift free. The crew increased power. Pistons ruptured. Smoke poured from the leg assemblies. Tyranids climbed the immobilized machine. They entered gun ports, exhaust stacks, and ammunition lifts. The Gargant continued firing while the swarm consumed it from within. Its headgun discharged one final time, then the ammunition magazine ignited. The explosion cleared a crater kilometers wide. Fresh Gaunts entered it before the fire died. Gorzad led the remaining Goths through the western district. His shooter clicked empty. He pulled the trigger again. Nothing. He threw the weapon aside and drew his chopper. Around him, boys fought with empty guns, lengths of chain, broken armor plates and bare hands. Knobs used shell casings as clubs. Ammo runners died before reaching the batteries, their crates disappearing beneath rippers. An Ork beside Gorzad had lost his jaw. He continued biting. The ruined bones of his face scraped against a Gaunt's throat until the creature's flesh tore open. A venom cannon blast struck the mob. Living matter burst across the street. One boy's body expanded from within, armor plates popping loose as parasites multiplied beneath his hide. He screamed, punched both hands into his own abdomen, and ripped out a knot of feeding organisms. The next volley removed him. Gorzad climbed the remains of a barricade and saw Doc Riptooth operating in an open trench. The pain boy had transformed the firing step into a surgery. Limbs lay sorted by approximate size. Squig organs floated inside buckets of chemical preservative. Wounded orcs waited only long enough for Riptooth to decide whether they could still hold weapons. He stapled the torso of one boy closed while firing a slugger into Rippers with his other hand. "Hold still." The patient had no lower body. "I am holding still." "Hold stiller." Riptooth drove another industrial staple through the orc's abdomen. A Ripper climbed onto the table. The doc pinned it with a bone saw and cut it in half without looking. More came through the trench wall. Riptooth kicked a bucket into them. Severed organs spilled across the ground. The Rippers ignored the living and swarmed the meat. "See," he told the patient. "Medicine." A Hormagaunt leapt into the trench. Riptooth met it with the saw. The blade caught beneath its jaw and cut upward, filling his apron with black blood. The creature's talons opened his side before it died. The doc looked down at the wound. "Dat ain't right." He pressed the flaps of flesh together and began stapling them closed. Rippers entered through the opening. Riptooth paused. His abdomen moved beneath the skin. He punched one hand into the wound, caught a feeding organism, and tore it out. Another climbed through the hole in his back. A third disappeared beneath his ribs. The doc continued operating. He stapled himself shut around them. The Rippers ate outward. His skin split along the seams. The abdomen opened. Small heads emerged through muscle, jaws working. Riptooth laughed once. Then the trench became a moving carpet of teeth. Gorzad turned away only when the doc's iron saw disappeared beneath them. The inner swarm reached Megascrap's central approaches. The Overfiend Scarboys held the avenue beneath his banner. They were the largest surviving knobs on Octaria, armored in plates taken from tanks, gargants, and dead rivals. Power claws opened and closed around them. Big choppers rose above the smoke. The Swarm Lord remained beyond sight. Its presence lived in the movement of everything else. Warriors changed direction together. Gaunts abandoned one breach and flooded another. Carnifexes attacked the Scarboys in waves, not to break them, but to dull their weapons and exhaust their strength. Zaplug stood chained to the remains of a gun tower. The rods in his skull had begun melting. The weird boy's body shuddered beneath pressures no flesh could survive. The wah of dying millions pushed upward through him. The shadow in the warp pressed down. Gorzad reached him. "Now!" Zaplug's eyes were black. "Too much. That's what you said last time. Last time weren't to end." A Tyranid warrior cleared the barricade. Gorzad caught its sword arm, pulled it close, and crushed his iron jaw through the creature's face. The warrior's remaining limbs tore across his armor before he threw the corpse down. "Do it!" Zaplug looked toward the inner swarm. Synapse creatures moved through it in ranks, crests pulsing beneath the smoke. Behind them, something greater waited. The weird boy smiled. "Gork's gonna hit me." "Probably. Mork too. Maybe." "Good." Zaplug tore the chains from the tower. The wah entered him. Green light burst from his mouth, eyes and wounds. His skin split along his arms. Energy crawled across the street and ignited every orc weapon it touched. He raised both hands. The sky turned green. The psychic blast struck the swarm. Gaunts became ash without burning. Warriors exploded inside their carapaces. Synapse creatures ruptured in a line stretching from Megascrap to the horizon. The controlling pressure vanished across a section of the inner ring. Tyranids staggered. Some attacked one another. Others stopped. A corridor opened through the swarm. Zaplug's skull swelled. The rods drove outward as bone fractured around them. His eyes burst first. Green fire poured from the sockets. "Wah!" he whispered. His head detonated. The blast threw Gorzad from his feet and erased the gun tower behind them. When he rose, the weird boy was gone. Only fragments of chain and blackened bone remained. The Overfiend saw the corridor. He charged. The Scarboy followed. Gorzad gathered what remained of his mob and ran with them. They struck the disordered Tyranids before new synapse nodes could take control. Choppers opened gaunts.
Power claws shattered warriors. The Overfiend led from the front, killing with axe and mechanical fist. Every blow threw bodies across the avenue. A tyrant guard met Gorzad. Its armor was scarred from artillery. One crushing claw had been severed. The remaining limb closed around Gorzad's power claw. The orc weapon failed. Its motor screamed. The claw locked half open. The tyrant guard pulled him forward and drove a blade through the plates beneath his arm. Gorzad felt the point grind against bone. He headbutted the creature. Its skull did not break. He did it again. The iron plates across his jaw bent. The tyrant guard raised its weapon for the killing blow. Gorzad tore the dead power claw from his arm. Cables snapped. Blood sprayed from the mounting sockets. He gripped the ruined mechanism in both hands and swung it like a hammer. The first blow split the tyrant guard's crest. The second drove it to one knee. The third opened the head. Gorzad struck until the weapon vanished inside the skull.
Then the Carnifex hit him. The horn entered through his abdomen and emerged from his back. The impact lifted him from the ground. His legs kicked above the corpses as the creature charged through the remaining Goths. Gorzad struck its face with the broken power claw. The Carnifex threw him down. Its foot landed across his hips. The bones of his pelvis shattered. Armor folded. His lower body disappeared beneath the crushing weight. The Carnifex leaned down. Gorzad reached into its eye socket. His fingers closed around the orb. He pulled. The eye came free, trailing nerves and fluid. The creature reared. Its other foot descended. Gorzad laughed into the shadow. He had once feared missing the fight. He died beneath more enemies than he could count. The Overfiend killed the Carnifex that reached him. His axe split its skull. His claw seized the upper jaw and tore the head apart. The beast collapsed, but one talon opened the war boss's thigh before it died. The wound was deep. Green blood ran down his leg and pooled beneath his boot. The last Scar boys gathered around him. Then the swarm parted. The Swarm Lord advanced. It had spent gaunts, warriors, tyrant guard, and carnifexes to reach this moment. It had fed the Overfiend victories, drained his ammunition, broken his machines, and killed his guards. Now it came forward, with fresh tyrant guards surrounding it. 4 bone sabers rested in its hands. It remembered dying. The Overfiend roared and charged. The tyrant guard died first. His claw crushed one through the torso. His axe removed the head of another. A Carnifex struck from the flank, and the Overfiend buried the axe between its eyes before turning back toward the command creature. The Swarm Lord waited. The remaining Tyranids killed the last Scarboys. The Overfiend stood alone. He attacked. His axe passed close enough to the Swarm Lord's head to tear chitin from its crest. The command creature yielded one step and caught the returning blow upon 2 sabers. The Overfiend struck with the claw. The Swarm Lord turned. Metal teeth closed upon empty air. A bone blade opened the war boss's wounded thigh. The Overfiend laughed and swung again. Each blow possessed the strength to break a battle tank. The Swarm Lord did not meet that strength. It redirected it. 4 blades guided the axe past its body, cut cables from the war boss's armor, and opened wounds across his flanks. The Overfiend advanced. The Swarm Lord retreated, always toward the wounded leg, always forcing the orc to turn, plant his weight, and tear the injury wider. The war boss began slowing. Not enough for any lesser creature to survive. Enough for the Swarm Lord. The Overfiend feinted with the axe and caught one bone saber in his claw. The power field cracked the living blade. He pulled the Swarm Lord closer. Gotcha. Another saber cut through the exposed power cable feeding the claw. The weapon died. Its teeth locked around the broken blade, but no longer moved. The Swarm Lord tore itself free. The Overfiend used the dead claw as a hammer. It struck the command creature's shoulder and broke armor. The Swarm Lord staggered. The war boss raised his axe for the killing blow. His wounded leg failed, only for a heartbeat, only enough. 4 bone sabers moved. One pierced the wrist holding the axe. Another opened the abdomen. The third entered beneath the iron gob. The 4th cut through the side of the skull. The Overfiend remained standing. He tried to bite. The Swarm Lord tore the blade sideways. Bone split. The war boss's skull opened from jaw to crown. The Swarm Lord caught his falling body. It drove its mouth into the broken head. Teeth entered the brain. The great devourer consumed the thoughts of the ruler who had defied it, absorbing instinct, memory, and the brutal knowledge of decades of war. The Overfiend's claw struck the ground. His banner fell. Octarius broke. 6 warlords declared themselves the new Overfiend before the corpse cooled. 2 began fighting over Gargates. Another ordered his mobs to abandon Megascrap and attack a rival's ammunition stores. A 4th claimed the Swarmlord's victory had been achieved by cheating and demanded an immediate rematch. The Tyranids exploited every division. The inner swarm opened. The outer swarm closed. Orc armies turned their weapons upon one another, while Leviathan advanced between them. Above Octaria, biofleets consumed the wreckage of the final Orc armada. Beyond the system, tendrils of the hive mind shifted toward new worlds. Beneath Megascrap, digestion pools filled with the dead. Green bodies dissolved beside violet carapaces. Armor, weapons, bone and flesh sank into chemical darkness. Capillary roots drank the slurry and carried it upward. Deeper still, beyond sight, orcoid spores settled into the ruined soil. They carried the promise of new greenskins. Tyranid phage cells found them. The spores divided, the cells consumed. The war continued in blood, in memory, in drifting fleets, and in organisms too small for any warrior to see. The Orcs had become stronger. The Tyranids had learned how they became strong. And when Octarius fell silent, the hunger moved on.